Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Snoozy Scientist, where we drift through the wonders of science, one sleepy yawn at a time. Tonight, we are traveling into the hidden patterns of evolution, searching for the quiet forces that shaped the rarest mind our planet has ever seen. Earth has existed for 4.54 billion years, a span so deep that continents have collided, oceans have opened and closed, and ancient mountain ranges have risen taller than the clouds before, slowly sinking back into the crust. Across this immense timeline, evolution has reinvented the same solutions again and again. Scientists have found that eyes emerged independently in many different branches of life. Studies show that wings appeared in insects, birds, and bats through completely separate paths. Armor, venom, complex bodies, and social behavior have all resurfaced more than once, shaped by pressure, opportunity, and chance. Nature rarely creates something only a single time. In ecosystems from coral reefs to savannas, countless species developed heightened senses, intricate communication, and surprisingly advanced problem solving. Fossil evidence reveals ancient birds and mammals that showed impressive cognitive leaps, while modern dolphins, elephants, crows, and octopuses each demonstrate forms of intelligence that continue to astonish researchers. And yet, across millions of species living today and billions that have come and gone, only one lineage reached a level of intelligence capable of reshaping entire landscapes, storing knowledge outside the body, building tools that remade its environment, and sending machines into the sky. It is one of the strangest patterns in natural history. But why? On a planet that repeats successful ideas so often, did this ability appear only once? What conditions shaped this rare threshold that so many species approached but never crossed? How many ancient lineages came close before their paths narrowed, stalled, or vanished entirely? And what hidden forces guided the fragile rise of the one mind that changed the course of the planet? Tonight, we are stepping gently through deep time to explore the strange chain of events that shaped intelligence from the first simple cells to the earliest primates, from shifting African landscapes to the spark of early tools. But before we begin, if you enjoy slow and soothing journeys like this one, quiet explorations through the mysteries of science, I would be grateful if you gave this video a gentle like and perhaps tapped subscribe. It helps more sleepy and curious minds find this calm corner of the internet. And if you would be so kind, let me know in the comments, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there? It is always such a joy to see how far across the world this little sleepy journey travels. So now take a deep breath, let your shoulders loosen, and together, let us begin. As we drift onward, the story settles into the deep and patient rhythms of life itself. Every chapter of Earth's history holds a quiet pattern, a kind of echo that moves through oceans, forests, and plains. It is the way evolution answers the same challenges with familiar shapes and familiar ideas, even when the creatures themselves are distant and unrelated. When you look closely, the planet carries a long memory. It reuses what works. In the early seas, long before plants softened the land, sunlight filtered through drifting clouds of plankton. Within those waters, small and simple animals learned to sense the glow above them. Over countless generations, tiny clusters of light sensitive cells became more precise, then folded into shallow cups, then grew clearer and sharper. This happened not once, but many times. Lineages separated by entire worlds of ancestry reached the same solution. The planet was wide, but the need to see was universal, so eyes bloomed wherever survival favored them. Some grew like polished glass orbs, some stayed small and subtle, able to sense a faint shimmer in the water. All of them came from the same pressure, the same silent invitation from the world outside. When life rose onto land, another pattern followed. The air opened like an endless highway, and creatures learned to claim it. Insects, delicate and ancient, discovered the lift hidden in thin sheets of membrane. Later, feathered bodies found that same hidden lift, and bone by bone reshaped their ancestors' arms into wings. Much later still, mammals spread soft skin along their limbs and let the night winds carry them between trees. Each attempt was its own invention, yet all were drawn toward the same promise. Flight changed the view of the world, and so life reinvented it again and again. Armor grew in a similar way, answering the same fear across distant ages. Ancient fish layered their bodies with bony plates. Land reptiles formed scales that gleamed under the sun. Beetles crafted hardened shells that closed like little shields around their soft interiors. Even in the quiet of tidal flats, small crustaceans carried protective skins etched with patterns as old as the waves. Predators sharpened their teeth, so prey thickened their defenses. Sensitivity met danger at every turn, and the shapes of life adapted with a familiar logic. Venom followed this same rhythm. It appeared in sea creatures that drifted like ribbons, and in spiders that lived in the smallest cracks of bark. It seeped into the fangs of vipers and the stingers of insects. Unrelated families discovered the same chemistry, a kind of biological fire that could stop a heartbeat or slow a struggling prey. Wherever competition grew intense, venom evolved as a powerful answer. Nature seemed to keep reaching for this idea, shaping it in quiet laboratories of bone, gland, and nerve. With each echo, evolution showed how easily successful traits travel across time. Problems repeat, and so do solutions. Even complex bodies came back again, sculpted in new ways by old pressures. In the seas, large predators with streamlined forms appeared in several eras. On land, swift runners with long limbs emerged again after ancient extinctions cleared the plains. Social behavior blossomed repeatedly among mammals, birds, insects, and even some fish, all of them weaving intricate relationships that allowed their groups to thrive. Because of all this, many scientists expected that intelligence, too, would rise in many places. After all, the world offered endless puzzles: food to find, shelter to build, seasons to remember, danger to avoid. Each challenge rewarded curiosity and problem solving. The ingredients for sharp minds existed in every landscape. Rainforests had abundant resources that invited new strategies. Deserts had harsh cycles that encouraged clever survival. Oceans held shifting currents that demanded constant awareness. The world was not short on opportunities for thought to deepen. And so, if evolution repeated eyes and wings and armor without hesitation, it seemed reasonable to expect that high intelligence would also bloom more than once. Life had so many chances. Across ancient continents, different families of animals pushed their senses further, stretching the limits of memory and communication. Some grew complex social worlds that required subtle decisions and careful alliances. Others learned to use objects around them, turning simple materials into tools that extended their reach. Quiet ingenuity threaded through many branches of Earth's tree. Yet something subtle lingered, something that held them just short of a certain threshold. Minds grew bright in many lineages, but did not quite ignite in the way our own eventually did. Instead, a gentle ceiling floated above most forms of intelligence, shaping their growth but never letting them climb too high. The world kept repeating many of its inventions, yet intelligence remained delicate, slow to deepen, and easily stalled. This quiet pattern forms the foundation of the story we are following, a planet that often revisits its best ideas, sculpting familiar traits from unfamiliar origins, created eyes and wings and armor countless times. But as we move through this landscape of repeated solutions, a curious truth settles in the background. Not all echoes travel equally. Some reflections fade before they ever become clear. As we drift deeper into this story, the world grows more intricate. The landscapes of Earth begin to fill with creatures whose minds glow in ways that feel familiar, as if distant sparks once tried to ignite into something greater. These sparks appeared in different places and in different eras, each shaped by its own environment, each carrying the quiet possibility of reaching further than any species before it. Their paths are some of the most intriguing in the long history of life. Far from the shore, beneath rolling waves of open ocean, dolphins moved with a grace shaped by millions of years of water and motion. Their bodies slipped through blue corridors filled with shifting light. Their minds held maps of currents, memories of voices, and a sense of community woven through sound. They spoke in whistles and clicks, filling the sea with woven patterns of communication. In their social groups, they formed bonds that lasted a lifetime. They solved puzzles, learned from one another, and recognized themselves in reflections, a rare trait among animals. It is easy to imagine how such intelligence might have continued to grow, yet the sea itself held them in place. The ocean, for all its beauty, offered no materials for delicate construction, no fire, no durable surfaces, no tools to be shaped. A dolphin's world was fluid and ever shifting. Their bodies, crafted so perfectly for swimming, could not manipulate the environment around them. They could understand, but they could not build. Their minds reached outward, but the sea gave nothing to hold. Intelligence needs a stage where ideas can be placed into the physical world, and in the water, that stage never formed. On land, another lineage carried an ancient wisdom. Elephants moved slowly across grasslands, forests, and deserts. The earth trembled softly beneath their feet. Their memory was astonishing, stretching across vast distances and long seasons. They knew the taste of old water holes and the shifting routes of migration. They formed deep family units, comforting calves and guiding young adults with steady patience. Their grief, expressed in gentle touches around the bones of their dead, hinted at emotional understanding that few species share. Their size, which gave them strength and safety, also shaped the limits of their path. Large bodies require enormous energy, and expanding brain power comes with a biological cost. Elephants devoted much of their life to finding enough food and water to sustain themselves. They could not afford to push their brains endlessly upward. Their long pregnancies and slow reproductive rate made experimentation risky. Nature tends to be cautious with heavy bodied creatures, allowing only small adjustments over time. Their minds were powerful, but the demands of their bodies nudged them into stability rather than rapid change. High above the ground, among the branches and the wind, crows carved out a different sort of brilliance. They crafted hooks from twigs and shaped leaves into tiny tools. They played, stored food for lean days, and remembered the faces of humans for years. In wide and open skies, they traveled far, watching the world from a vantage point that few creatures ever experienced. Their intelligence shimmered in quick decisions and careful planning, a kind of quiet artistry. But birds, with their light frames and tight metabolic limits, faced another ceiling. Their bodies were tuned for flight, which left little room for large and energy-hungry brains. The more mass a bird carries, the harder it is to leave the ground. Evolution balanced intelligence with the need to stay aloft. Crow minds grew bright within these boundaries, but those boundaries stayed firm. Their creativity could not expand endlessly. They lived in worlds of motion, not construction, and their delicate bodies kept them close to a threshold they could not cross. In the dim light of coral caves and drifting trails of sand, octopuses explored their surroundings with arms that felt and thought at the same time. Their bodies were soft, able to slip into cracks and wrap around textures with curious precision. They learned quickly and solved problems with an almost playful cleverness. Some carried shells for protection, others stacked stones to block predators. Their intelligence unfolded quietly, far from the surface. Yet octopuses lived brief lives, most survived only a few years. Their brilliance appeared like a flash, bright and momentary, but without the long childhood or the extended adulthood needed to build knowledge from generation to generation. Their world, rich with sensation, lacked the continuity that allows cultures to grow over time. Each individual started from the beginning, learning alone. Evolution could not easily preserve their inventions, and so their path reset with every new life. Each of these lineages reached towards something remarkable. Their minds curved upward, touching edges of insight, imagination, and understanding. But all of them met limits that were not failures, only quiet boundaries shaped by the deep logic of nature. Their environments offered beauty, but not the right materials. Their bodies granted strength, but carried heavy costs. Their lifespans, their energy needs, their social worlds, all created gentle ceilings that kept their intelligence within certain ranges. Many creatures came close, close enough for us to glimpse what might have been. Their stories form the first missed paths on this long journey. They remind us that intelligence does not rise on a straight line. It grows where it can, shaped by the places and the bodies that carry it. And sometimes, even the brightest sparks fade before they ever become a flame. As we continue drifting through the long tapestry of Earth's history, the world begins to reveal creatures whose minds shimmered with possibilities now lost to time. Their bones rest in stone and soil, yet hints of their intelligence linger in the shapes of skulls, in the wear of ancient tools, in the faint traces of behavior preserved by chance. These were not the dolphins or elephants or crows of today, whose stories we gently explored before. These were beings who lived in vanished landscapes, shaped by climates and continents that no longer exist. For a moment in prehistory, their minds nudged closer to a threshold that only one lineage eventually crossed. Long before early humans walked the savannas, other mammals learned to navigate a world that demanded subtlety and memory. In the forests of ancient South America, a group of hoofed creatures known as litopterns developed bodies that mimicked horses, yet their skulls hinted at a surprising awareness of their surroundings. Their sensory regions were enlarged, suggesting a life that required careful decisions and nuanced reactions. They thrived in shifting ecosystems for millions of years. Their intelligence was quiet and steady, but they lived in isolation from the pressures that usually sharpen cognition. When new predators arrived and climates shifted, their line dwindled. The world asked for rapid change, and these gentle runners could not alter their pace quickly enough. In the northern continents, a creature known as the dire wolf left behind clues of a different sort of intelligence. Their packs were large, their hunts required coordination across sweeping plains, their social bonds may have been intricate, shaped by shared risks and shared meals. Fossils of multiple individuals found together speak of cooperation that went beyond simple instinct, yet their path was tied closely to the great herbivores of the Ice Age. When those herds collapsed, the predators that followed them faltered as well. Their minds were capable, but their lives were woven too tightly into an ecosystem that was fading away. With the disappearance of their prey, the dire wolves reached a limit they could not step past. In Australia's ancient interior, a bird once walked with a slow, deliberate stride. Ginornis was tall and sturdy, shaped for endurance rather than flight. Its brain case was modest, yet certain internal features suggest refined senses, and the ability to navigate a complex environment of lakes, dry plains, and seasonal fires. Some researchers have wondered whether its cautious movements and protective behavior around its nesting grounds hint at a deeper cognitive thread. These birds lasted for countless generations, but as climates grew hotter and human presence spread across the continent, their fragile eggs and slow reproduction placed them at risk. Their intelligence helped them survive in difficult landscapes, but it could not protect them from changes that moved faster than their instincts could adapt. Far earlier, in the warm forests of the Eocene, a small primate called Teilhardina darted through branches with remarkable agility. Its eyesight sharpened over time, its hands grasped more precisely. Its world required problem solving, memory, and careful navigation in a realm of shadows and leaves. Teilhardina represents one of the earliest steps toward primate cognition. Its lineage held potential, but it lived in an era when the climate fluctuated dramatically. Sudden temperature shifts forced entire families of species to migrate or vanish. The delicate chain of conditions that encourages deeper intelligence never held steady for long. Something always interrupted it, and the line that could have risen further remained small and scattered. Even among birds whose ancestors once shared the world with early mammals, there were glimmers of higher thought. Large corvid relatives from the Pleistocene left behind traces of complex flock behavior and long range resource tracking. They lived in vast communal groups and navigated landscapes with changing seasons and unpredictable food availability. Their lives required learning from one another and remembering distant feeding sites. Their potential grew alongside the Ice Age. Yet as the Great Cold retreated and forests shifted, their ecological niche narrowed. The skills that once benefited them became less vital in the emerging world, and with fewer pressures to push their intelligence upward, the momentum faded. Some extinct species displayed signs of near tool use, though crude by modern standards. Early ancestors of modern raccoons, nimble and curious, explored objects with a dexterity rare for their size. Their paws could manipulate stones and shells in ways that suggest experimentation, but without the right blend of social learning, long developmental periods, and environmental challenges, their cleverness never expanded into cumulative breakthroughs. Curiosity flickered brightly but never formed a sustained pattern. Across eras, the story repeats in gentle variations. A spark appears in one lineage, then another, showing hints of memory, communication, problem solving, or cooperation beyond what their ancestors possessed. For a time, these sparks grow. Then something shifts, a climate cools or warms, a predator arrives, a food source disappears, a body plan reaches its energetic limit, a landscape changes too quickly, and the rising curve of intelligence levels out. These were Earth's almost minds, creatures standing on slopes that leaned toward a higher kind of thinking, but never quite rising into it. Their journeys remind us that intelligence is shaped not only by brains, but by the quiet architecture of bodies, environments, pressures, and time. Growth requires more than potential. It asks for stability and challenge in the right balance, held for long stretches measured in millions of years. In many corners of the past, the world carried possibilities that glowed just beneath the surface. They shone briefly, then softened into silence. Each one added depth to the long story of cognition, even if none of them reached the summit that later belonged to only one lineage. As our quiet journey continues, the landscape of life begins to shift from the glimmers of almost minds toward the deeper forces that shaped what intelligence could become. The world is full of possibilities, yet every possibility has a cost. Nothing in evolution is free, and among all the traits that animals have developed, none is more demanding than a large and active brain. Across ancient forests, along windswept plains, and beneath the rolling waves of prehistoric seas, countless creatures rose and fell under this single truth. A big brain is a hungry organ. It consumes energy with a steady pull, like a small fire that must never go out. Even when the body rests, the brain keeps drawing fuel, hour after hour, year after year. For most species, that cost is simply too steep. To understand this part of Earth's story, imagine the world long before early humans appeared. Picture a time when plants grew thick across humid landscapes, when predators prowled in dense shadows, when small mammals and reptiles scurried through layers of fallen leaves. Food was not always abundant. A single drought or cold season could thin entire populations. Every creature had to balance its energy carefully, spending just enough to survive while saving enough to endure the next shift in climate or resources. In such a world, a large brain could feel like a luxury. It did not help an animal run faster than its predators. It did not shield it from cold nights or fierce storms. It needed constant nourishment, which meant any animal with an expanding brain had to find reliable food, often more food, and it had to find it consistently. Only a few environments could support that burden. Many species experimented with small increases in brain size. Fossils show gradual expansions in certain lineages, slight broadening of the skull, or a modest thickening of the cortex. But these changes often reversed in later generations. Evolution tries ideas, but if the cost is greater than the reward, the idea fades. Some animals lived in harsh climates where food availability rose and fell like a tide. A brain that asked for too much energy in lean years became a liability. When pressure mounted, intelligence became something to let go of, not something to build upon. In other cases, predators shaped the path. An animal that spent too much time searching for extra calories could not stay alert enough to avoid dangers lurking nearby. Quick instincts, strong legs, or simple defensive behaviors often outweighed the advantages of careful thought. For many species, survival depended on speed and efficiency rather than deep planning. Even social species, which sometimes benefit from shared knowledge and cooperation, faced limits. Large groups require vast amounts of food to sustain their members. If a species attempted to develop a more complex mind, but lived in an environment that could not provide for the growing needs of its population, the strain would ripple through the entire group. Hunger reduces exploratory behavior. Fear narrows the world into immediate decisions. Slowly, the lineage would settle back into patterns that demanded less from the brain. Energy costs shaped bodies as well. Some animals developed strong muscles for running or digging. Some grew heavy armor or thick hides. These traits required their own large investments of energy. A species cannot afford to maximize everything at once. It chooses through countless generations which systems to strengthen and which to keep modest. Often strength or endurance won over cognition. A body that could reliably outrun or outlast danger needed no additional intelligence to thrive. There were also creatures whose lives were short. Their entire story unfolded in only a handful of seasons. Their young learned quickly, but had little time to accumulate new strategies. In such brief lives, investing energy in a rapidly growing brain made little sense. They needed to reach adulthood swiftly, reproduce, and leave behind offspring that could do the same. Their evolutionary path favored efficiency and speed, not the slow and careful development that large brains require. Even in species that edged closer to advanced cognition, another challenge waited. A large brain comes with long childhoods. It takes time to grow, to fill with knowledge, to shape itself through experience. Long childhoods mean long periods of vulnerability. Parents must work harder to protect their young. Communities must tolerate the presence of individuals who contribute little while they grow. Many species simply could not support that burden. The environment shifted too often, the predators were too numerous, the food was too sparse, the risks were too high. So, through millions of years, Earth became a world where intelligence appeared in gentle steps rather than leaps. Simple minds could survive with fewer calories. They avoided the complexity of raising slow developing young. They avoided the instability that often comes with high cognitive demands. These creatures succeeded by staying small in thought, but strong in presence. Their lives were steady, their worlds were narrow but workable. In this balance of survival, most species released their hold on the path toward larger brains. They settled into simpler patterns that required less energy and offered a safer return. This part of Earth's quiet story reminds us that intelligence is shaped not only by curiosity or opportunity, but also by the weight of biology itself. Every mind carries the cost of its own fire. For many creatures, that fire flickered briefly, bright enough to hint at what could be, yet too costly to sustain. The world allowed these sparks to shine only for a time, then folded them back into the long rhythm of life that moves steadily across the ages. As our gentle path through Earth's story continues, the world grows wider and more unpredictable. The rise of intelligence, fragile and slow, moves through time like a delicate thread. Yet, throughout the planet's history, that thread has been pulled apart again and again by events so vast that they reshaped the very surface of the Earth. These were the great extinction moments, rare and powerful interruptions that swept across continents and oceans, leaving silence where once there had been life. 5 major catastrophes anchor this part of the tale. Each one arrived with its own character. Some came with roaring heat, some came with choking darkness, some came with cold that lasted more than a lifetime. All of them changed the course of evolution, wiping away entire families of animals and plants. In their aftermath, the world was not simply emptier, it was reset. The earliest of these upheavals unfolded in ancient seas when life was still simple. Warm, shallow waters held small creatures that drifted and crawled across soft sediments. Then, a shift in climate and chemistry spread through the oceans. Oxygen levels dropped, temperatures changed, waves of extinction rippled outward. The creatures that survived were often the ones with hardy bodies and modest energy needs. Any lineage experimenting with more complex forms found itself at risk. Minds that required more nourishment or bodies that demanded careful coordination were less likely to endure. The planet's reset pressed life back into simpler shapes. Much later, in the age when forests reached across continents and armored fish ruled the seas, another crisis arrived. This one unfolded over thousands of years. Vast volcanic eruptions darkened the skies. Rivers grew acidic. The balance of life in the oceans collapsed. Many animals with sophisticated sensory systems or intricate hunting strategies vanished. Their ecosystems had supported their gradual rise in complexity. When those systems failed, so did the creatures who depended on them. Once again, the survivors tended to be species that could live with little, that grew quickly, or that reproduced in large numbers. Complexity stepped back to make room for resilience. Another great turning point came when land had become a home for towering trees and early insects. The seas still held a rich variety of life. Then temperatures plummeted and glaciers spread across much of the planet. Entire coastlines froze. Coral reefs collapsed. Creatures that relied on stable climates or narrow ranges of temperature disappeared. Intelligence, still rare and scattered at this time, offered no advantage against the unforgiving cold. The animals with the best chance of survival were small, adaptable, and able to endure scarcity. The world's more delicate experiments in cognition faded quietly into the geological record. The fourth catastrophe, far more severe, tore through Earth near the boundary between the Permian and Triassic periods. It was the most devastating event the planet has ever known. Intense volcanic activity filled the atmosphere with gases that warmed the climate to extremes. Vast regions turned to deserts. Oceans grew sluggish and low in oxygen. Almost every species vanished. This collapse acted like a giant eraser across the story of life. Any lineage that had begun to explore new sensory abilities, social interactions, or complex behaviors lost its place. After the devastation ended, the world belonged mostly to small reptiles and early ancestors of modern mammals. Intelligence, which takes long periods of stability to deepen, had little chance to grow during such upheaval. Evolution was forced to start over. The fifth crisis is the most familiar. It came at the end of the Cretaceous, when the skies brightened for a moment with the glow of an incoming asteroid. The impact shook the planet. Fires raced across forests. Dust veiled the sun. Plants weakened. The animals that depended on them followed. Dinosaurs, which had ruled the land for tens of millions of years, fell one after another. Feathered cousins survived in small pockets. Tiny mammals, living in burrows or sheltered places, endured as well. Here again, life that asked for little outlasted those that demanded more. The creatures with higher metabolic needs suffered most. Any spark of rising intelligence among dinosaur lineages or other complex species dimmed almost instantly. Across all these events, a pattern emerges. Intelligence is not simply a product of brain size or clever behaviors. It is an investment that takes time, nourishment, stability, and long unbroken stretches of environmental opportunity. When the world remains steady for millions of years, minds can slowly gather depth, memory strengthens, social bonds grow, problem solving expands. But when catastrophe sweeps through the world, this delicate process unravels. Many animals that showed early signs of complex thinking lived in finely tuned environments. When those environments broke apart, their cognitive advantages no longer mattered. A changing climate does not reward planning if the plan cannot outrun the transformation. A shifting sea does not reward curiosity if the currents that once supported life turn stagnant. A burning forest does not reward cooperation if the forest itself disappears. Complexity often disappears rather than deepens because it is built on foundations that must remain steady. When those foundations crack, the creatures that flourish are not the clever ones. They are the ones that can survive with less. They persist through hardship by simplicity, not by insight. So intelligence becomes a rare thread, easily broken, easily lost. Through the long sweep of time, the Earth has tested this trait again and again. Most experiments ended in quiet extinction. Only a few survived the resetting hand of the planet. Only a few held on through cycles of fire, ice, and silence. The journey continues with this knowledge resting beneath it, a reminder of how fragile the rise of a thinking mind has always been. As our quiet path moves forward, the world settles into an age ruled by creatures of staggering size and presence. The continents drift slowly, carrying forests, rivers, swamps, and plains across warm and humid climates. Life flourishes in forms so vast and varied that the earth feels almost overgrown. This is the long reign of the dinosaurs, a stretch of time that lasted for well over 100 million years, where one group of animals filled nearly every space the land could offer. During this era, the story of intelligence moved at a slower and more delicate pace. The world was vibrant, alive with sound and motion, yet beneath that color lay an unexpected constraint. When one group becomes so successful and so widespread, it shapes the possibilities for every other creature living beside it. The dinosaurs did not only dominate landscapes, they shaped the entire structure of life, closing doors that other species might have walked through. Small mammals lived quietly in the presence of these giants. They moved through leaf litter and hidden burrows, living in the shadows of towering plant eaters and swift predators. Their bodies stayed small, fast, and cautious, their senses sharpened to survive the darkness of the underbrush. They fed at night or in tight spaces where larger creatures could not reach. In this narrow world, their brains grew slowly, tuned for survival within limited environments. A larger brain requires time to grow, and time was a luxury small mammals did not have. Every hour of their lives was spent avoiding the attention of much larger neighbors. A dinosaur's gaze, even if uninterested, could bring danger. A footstep could crush. A shift in vegetation patterns caused by a herd of sauropods could erase a mammal's food source in moments. The presence of such dominant creatures meant that mammals needed to stay hidden, quick, and energetically efficient. Burrowing, climbing, and sprinting required lean bodies that did not favor excess weight in the skull. This constraint created what scientists sometimes describe as an ecological lockout. The idea can be imagined as a vast landscape of valleys and hills, where evolution slowly climbs toward new abilities and possibilities. In a world ruled by dinosaurs, many of the higher pathways were blocked. If a mammal began to grow larger or experiment with new forms of behavior, it entered a world already filled with powerful competitors. Large plant eaters consumed most of the available vegetation. Large predators hunted anything that approached their size. There was little ecological space left for mammals to grow into. Because of this, mammals remained small for a very long time. Their lives unfolded quickly, with short childhoods and short adult years. They reproduced rapidly to survive constant threats, and rapid reproduction tends to favor simple, fast strategies over long and careful development. Intelligence, which grows slowly and requires extended learning, could not flourish under such pressure. The mammals of this age carried sparks of innovation, but those sparks flickered quietly, never given enough time to deepen. Even birds, distant relatives of the dinosaurs themselves, lived within this same constraint. Some grew clever in limited ways. Some developed cooperative behaviors or refined senses. But the overall landscape was shaped by the large and dominant groups that defined the food webs of the time. The environment rewarded strength, speed, size, and endurance more than careful thought. This domination did not mean dinosaurs were simple. Some species developed sophisticated senses, some had complex social structures, some communicated through sound or display. Yet their long evolutionary success created a world that did not encourage a significant rise in intelligence among smaller creatures. Stability can be a quiet barrier. When ecosystems remain unchanged for millions of years, life often settles into patterns that no longer push for new forms of cognition. Then, at the end of the Cretaceous period, the world shifted almost instantly. A bright streak crossed the sky, followed by an impact that shook the crust and sent shock waves through every ocean and forest. Fires spread, dust dimmed the sunlight, plants weakened, animals that depended on them weakened as well. The giants that had ruled for so long were suddenly vulnerable. Their bodies required constant food. Their young needed specific conditions. Their entire way of life had been built for a stable world that no longer existed. When the dinosaurs vanished, the planet did not immediately become peaceful. The skies remained hazy. The nights grew cold, but an unexpected door had opened. For the first time in an age, mammals stepped into a world no longer dominated by towering competitors. The landscapes that had once been filled with giants were now open and quiet. Grasses spread across new plains. Forests regrew in fragments. Food sources shifted and multiplied. Predators and prey reorganized themselves into new patterns. With fewer threats pressing them into hiding, mammals began to explore. They grew larger, their childhoods lengthened, their social groups expanded. Some developed new diets. Some developed new ways of moving. With these changes came new demands for memory, flexibility, and awareness. A larger brain, once too costly to sustain under constant danger, became a possibility. The surge in intelligence did not happen all at once. It moved slowly, shaped by climate, geography, and the quiet struggles of each species. But it happened because the ceiling that had held them down for so long had finally lifted. The world had room again, room to think, room to experiment, room to grow into something new. In this gentle opening of possibility, intelligence began its long climb toward forms that would eventually change the course of the planet. When the last echoes of the Great Impact faded, the Earth entered a long season of recovery. The skies remained dim for a time. The air carried the scent of ash and cooling stone. Forests stood in silence, their canopies thinned and their branches bare. Plains that once trembled under the weight of giants became open stretches of quiet land. The age of the dinosaurs, with all its grandeur and long shadows, had come to an end. What remained was a planet stripped of its former rulers, a place reshaped by loss, yet ready to begin again. In this transformed world, mammals emerged from the hidden spaces they had occupied for so many millions of years. They stepped from burrows, from hollowed logs, from cracks in stone. They found themselves in landscapes that no longer pressed them into secrecy. Without the towering presence of the great reptiles, the planet felt strangely spacious. It was an ecological vacuum, a rare opening in the history of life. For the first time, mammals could explore the surface widely and freely. The early years after the asteroid were challenging. Food sources were scattered. Weather patterns were unpredictable. Yet these pressures were balanced by new opportunities. Everywhere, niches stood empty. Herbivore roles that once belonged to massive creatures were now vacant. Predator roles were open as well. Even the air carried possibilities, since the skies were no longer filled with giant winged reptiles. The world had become a patchwork of unclaimed ecological spaces, each one inviting experimentation. Mammals responded with quiet bursts of innovation. Small insect eaters began to expand their diets, sampling seeds, fruits, leaves, and roots. Some grew larger bodies to handle new kinds of vegetation. Others remained small but changed their habits, venturing into trees or learning to glide through forest canopies. Over time, new forms appeared. Hoofed runners shaped themselves for open grasslands. Climbers adapted to dense woodland. Swimmers rose from shoreline species that found advantage in fishing where reptiles once dominated. As bodies diversified, so did minds. With new environments came new challenges, and with new challenges came new ways of thinking. Mammals living in social groups began to rely more on memory and communication. Those that ranged across larger territories needed to navigate changing seasons, shifting landscapes, and unpredictable food sources. Each step into a new niche created subtle pressures that favored mental flexibility. In forests that slowly recovered their green, early primates explored the branches. Their hands, already suited for grasping, became even more dexterous. Depth perception sharpened as they moved from tree to tree. They needed to judge distances carefully, track the movements of insects or fruits, and remember which parts of the forest held food at different times of year. These simple tasks required attention, learning, and a sense of spatial awareness more advanced than what their ancestors had known. Meanwhile, on open plains, mammalian predators learned to hunt without relying on sheer size or brute force. They needed strategy. Working in small packs or pairs, they coordinated movements, approached from angles that increased the chance of success, and adapted their techniques to each type of prey. Coordination encouraged communication, and communication encouraged the slow growth of mental complexity. The mammals that lived near rivers or lakes faced different challenges. Water currents shifted with storms. Fish populations fluctuated with the recovery of aquatic ecosystems. These animals needed to recognize patterns in movement and sound, sensing subtle cues in their environment. Their minds adjusted to these demands, gradually expanding their capacity for perception. The world had become a teacher, offering lessons in every corner. The loss of the dinosaurs had not simply freed space. It had created diversity of opportunity that forced mammals to explore the edges of what they could become. As their bodies shifted, their minds followed, growing into the shapes required by each new way of life. Some mammals developed longer childhoods, a change that allowed the young to learn from adults. These extended periods of growth created room for social behavior to deepen. Within groups, individuals began observing, imitating, and passing down knowledge in simple forms. Such cultural threads, even if fragile, helped minds evolve beyond immediate instinct. In environments where resources fluctuated, mammals that could anticipate change had an advantage. They adapted their movements with the seasons. They learned to store food or remember distant locations that offered safety. Slowly, planning entered the rhythm of their lives, supported by brains that were beginning to grow in proportion to these new demands. As the earth warmed again and forests spread more thickly, new interactions rose between species. Herbivores needed awareness of predators. Predators needed awareness of prey. Each encounter pushed cognition further. Mammals that interpreted subtle signals survived more often than those who moved without paying attention. All around the world, this quiet pattern unfolded. Step by step, mind by mind, mammals expanded not only in shape and size, but in the depth of their awareness. The absence of the great reptiles had created a rare window that allowed experimentation in every direction. For the first time, life was learning to think in ways that looked ahead, remembered behind, and adapted in between. The world after the asteroid held both hardship and promise. Through this mixture, the first true foundations of advanced intelligence began to form, shaped silently by landscapes that had opened at last. As the world continued to settle into new rhythms after the Great Reset, life found fresh ways to flourish. Forests thickened, rivers carved new paths across soft ground, grasslands stretched beneath wide skies. In these renewed landscapes, mammals and other creatures began to refine the abilities that had carried them through the fragile years that followed the asteroid. Among the most important of these abilities was the growing tendency to live, move, and survive together. Cooperation had existed long before these moments, but now it gained depth. The earth had opened spaces that encouraged animals to rely on one another in ways their ancestors never could. The rise of social creatures became one of the quiet engines that pushed intelligence forward, step by gentle step. Consider the early ancestors of wolves, moving through cool forests and plains where prey scattered quickly and unpredictably. A lone hunter could survive, but a coordinated group stood a far better chance. Working together meant more than sharing strength. It meant sensing the intentions of others, noticing small signals in posture or sound, and remembering which individuals in the pack excelled at certain tasks. The hunt required fluid coordination, a shifting dance that could last minutes or hours. To hold such patterns in mind, wolves needed brains that could store memories, track changing positions, and anticipate the movements of both allies and prey. This subtle form of strategy slowly shaped their minds, encouraging awareness that extended beyond the self. In the oceans, where sunlight fractured and softened as it passed through layers of water, dolphins expanded their already rich social worlds. Pods moved with grace, weaving through currents and open water. Their communication grew complex, filled with clicks and whistles that carried through the sea like threads of meaning. These sounds did not simply mark danger or food, they signaled identities, intentions, and relationships. Young dolphins learned by watching and listening, gathering knowledge from older members of the pod. Their intelligence developed in an environment where shared understanding was essential. A pod that responded cohesively to shifting currents or approaching predators survived more reliably than one without such unity. Within the growing forests, primates found themselves in worlds full of branches, shadows, and openings of light. Moving in groups meant learning the behavior of companions and relatives. Mothers remembered the locations of fruiting trees. Youngsters learned to follow, then to lead, then to explore. Hierarchies formed, not as rigid structures, but as flowing patterns shaped by age, experience, and the gentle negotiations of daily life. Grooming strengthened bonds. Soft calls revealed location or reassurance. Conflict was resolved through gestures and posture rather than brute force. Through these interactions, primates gained opportunities to understand intention, emotion, and shifting alliances. Their minds grew in tune with the rhythms of those around them. Social living demanded much from the brain. Communication, even in its simplest forms, required the ability to create signals and interpret them. Memory played a central role, allowing individuals to remember past experiences, track relationships, and sense when a situation resembled something encountered long before. Planning entered the picture as groups prepared for seasonal changes, divided food, or traveled to distant water sources. The brain learned not only to react, but to anticipate. These pressures refined cognitive abilities slowly, yet consistently, over generations. Social creatures developed a kind of mental flexibility that solitary animals rarely needed. They learned to navigate the invisible landscape of relationships. They understood the value of cooperation, even when cooperation demanded patience or sacrifice. In this way, sociality became a quiet teacher, guiding minds toward greater complexity. Yet social living, on its own, was not enough to create the kind of intelligence that would one day reshape landscapes. Many species formed intricate social systems, but their minds remained within the bounds set by their bodies and environments. Some lived in large groups without developing advanced cognition. Herd animals, for example, moved together for safety but relied on instinct more than learning. Their cooperation did not require planning or symbolic communication. It asked only for awareness of the group's direction and an ability to stay within its protective circle. Other creatures had strong social bonds but lacked the physical means to manipulate their surroundings. Dolphins, with their rich communication systems, could not shape objects or build structures. Wolves, for all their coordination, lived within a narrow range of survival strategies that did not lead toward tool use or sustained cultural growth. Primates came closer because of their hands and their tree-born agility, but even they needed further conditions before their intelligence could expand into something truly transformative. Sociality alone creates minds attuned to others. It sharpens perception and memory. It fosters learning and cooperation. But for a lineage to cross the threshold into deeper intelligence, it must have opportunities to build upon these foundations. It needs stability, time, and the tools offered by the body and environment. Without these, social behavior becomes a stable but limited pattern. With them, it becomes the early groundwork for something greater. Across the forests, plains, and oceans of this emerging world, cooperation spread quietly, shaping the minds of animals in subtle and profound ways. The rise of social creatures became one of the first steady currents pushing life toward future possibilities, leaving behind traces of growing awareness that would echo softly through the next chapters of Earth's long story. As the world continued its slow healing and the great forests of the Cenozoic deepened, a new kind of life began to move among the branches. The canopy, layered in light and shadow, offered both danger and safety. It was a place where a single misstep could send a creature falling, yet where height granted protection from many ground-dwelling hunters. In these swaying corridors of leaves, the early primates found a home that would shape the future of intelligence in quiet, extraordinary ways. The treetops required a kind of precision that no other environment demanded. Here, branches curved in unpredictable directions. Light filtered through breaks in the leaves, shifting patterns from moment to moment. Fruits ripened at different times, sometimes hidden behind thick foliage. Predators approached not from one direction but from many, gliding or leaping through the air. To survive this world, an animal needed to judge distances with accuracy, respond quickly to changes, and navigate a labyrinth that was never still. Forward-facing eyes became one of the first advantages. Instead of seeing far to the sides like many grazing animals, early primates developed overlapping fields of vision. This overlap allowed their brains to combine information from both eyes, creating a sense of depth. They could see the space between branches, sense the exact placement of a twig, and understand the shape of the world in 3 dimensions. In the forest canopy, where every leap carried risk, this ability was essential. With this new way of seeing came a subtle shift in how their brains processed the world. A creature that understands depth begins to understand possibility. It learns not only where things are, but where they could be. Branches become paths, gaps become challenges, the treetops become a puzzle to solve each day. Grasping hands added another layer to this growing puzzle. Instead of claws built for scratching or paws built for running, primate hands could hold, pinch, and adjust their grip. Their fingers curled around branches with gentle precision. They could hang from one arm while reaching for fruit with the other. They could examine objects, feeling their shapes and textures. This connection between hand and mind allowed primates to explore their world through touch as well as sight. The combination of depth perception and grasping hands created a loop of learning. A young primate, watching a parent leap or climb, could imitate and refine each movement. The environment rewarded careful planning. A misjudged leap might be fatal, yet a well-judged one opened new territory. Over generations, these challenges shaped creatures that relied on decision-making and memory as much as instinct. Life in the trees also encouraged flexibility. Food sources changed with the seasons. Some fruits ripened high above the canopy, others along the trunk or in shaded understories. Primates needed to remember where resources appeared, when they would return, and which routes through the branches were safest. This mental mapping demanded a brain that could store layers of information, not just for survival but for efficiency. As bodies remained small, brains began to grow larger in proportion. In many animals, brain size scales with body size, staying in quiet balance. But primates began to break that pattern. Their brains expanded faster than their bodies, adding new folds, new circuits, and new ways of processing the world. They learned to interpret social cues within their groups. They remembered past interactions. They recognized individuals and understood hierarchies. The treetops were not only a place of movement, they were a place of relationships, communication, and cooperation. This brain growth was unusual because it carried a cost. Larger brains required more nourishment. They demanded longer childhoods, during which young primates learned how to navigate both their environment and their social world. A long childhood meant vulnerability, yet it also meant a greater chance to absorb skills, observe experienced adults, and practice fine movements again and again. Slowly, these ingredients began to align. The canopy required complexity, the hands allowed experimentation, the eyes offered clarity. The brain expanded to meet these needs, and in doing so, opened new pathways that evolution had rarely explored. The early primates were not aware of the remarkable direction they were taking. They simply lived, learned, and adapted to their world. But in their daily lives, in the slow and steady shaping of senses and memory, a foundation was forming. Their lineage carried the seeds of future minds, minds that would one day descend from the trees and look upon the world with a new kind of curiosity. For now, they remained among the branches, moving with silent grace through sunlit leaves. The forest embraced their growing complexity, guiding them gently toward a destiny that neither they nor the world could yet imagine. As the slow story of primate evolution continued, the center of gravity for future change settled upon a continent shaped by motion. Africa, vast and ancient, did not rest quietly during these long ages. Its climate shifted again and again, pulled by the rhythm of deep earth forces and the turning of celestial cycles. Rainfall wandered across the land like a restless painter, drawing forests in one era and sweeping them away in the next. Grasslands rose where trees had stood for centuries, then retreated as the canopy reclaimed its space. Lakes filled and dried, rivers shifted their paths. No landscape remained the same for long. For the early ancestors of humans, this relentless instability turned the world into both a challenge and a teacher. While many other species lived in climates that offered predictability, these primates faced a land that changed shape around them. Seasons were not enough to guide the rhythm of life. Entire ecosystems could transform within the span of a few thousand years, a brief moment in geological time. A lush valley might become an open plain. A dense forest might thin into scattered groves. The creatures living in these places had to reshape their lives just as quickly. In periods when rainfall was generous, forests spread across the land. Thick vegetation offered fruit, leaves, and shelter. Our early ancestors could climb, hide, and feed within the canopies much like their primate relatives elsewhere. But these periods never lasted. The climate swung back toward dryness, sometimes gradually, sometimes abruptly. Forests would shrink and open. The canopy that once protected them became patchy. Sunlight streamed through where leaves once blocked it. Food sources grew scarce or shifted to new locations. As forests thinned, grasslands emerged like golden oceans. Tall grasses waved in the wind, concealing grazing animals and predators. The open environment demanded a different way of living. Climbing skills mattered less. Awareness of sound, sight, and distance mattered more. Moving between scattered trees required careful judgment and a sense of direction that stretched past what the treetops once offered. Our ancestors, once sheltered by branches, now had to watch the horizon and learn to read the movement of herds, the patterns of clouds, and the approach of danger. Each shift in climate reshaped their challenges. As water sources dried, finding new ones required exploration and memory. As forests returned, new foods appeared while old ones vanished. This cycle repeated countless times, sculpting a lineage that could not depend solely on instinct. The environment did not reward a fixed strategy, it rewarded flexibility. The primates who survived were those who could learn quickly, remember distant places, and adapt their behavior as the world around them transformed. In such a landscape, foresight became valuable. Planning was no longer a luxury but a necessity. A group that remembered an old riverbed might find water even in dry years. Individuals who explored beyond familiar places could discover new feeding grounds. These small acts of curiosity, multiplied across generations, strengthened the cognitive abilities of the lineage that would one day become human. Resource scarcity encouraged creativity. Stones and sticks, once ignored, became useful when food grew more difficult to reach. Early ancestors began to experiment with these materials in simple ways, guided not by tradition but by necessity. A branch could be stripped and used to dig. A stone could crack a tough shell. These early experiments did not yet form cultural traditions, but they revealed an emerging ability to see objects not only as they were, but as what they could be. Social bonds also deepened under the pressures of instability. In times of food scarcity, cooperation increased the chance of survival. Groups that shared knowledge about safe routes or hidden resources thrived more often than those that relied on solitary strategies. Care for the young became even more important, for learning took time. Teaching and imitation wove through daily life, creating a slow exchange of experience that strengthened the group as a whole. Predators, too, shifted with the climate. Large cats and hyenas adapted quickly to open plains, forcing our ancestors to stay alert and inventive. They learned to use the rising heat of midday to their advantage, walking long distances when predators rested. They learned to navigate the boundary between forest and grassland, using the trees for safety and the open spaces for foraging. These behaviors required awareness that extended beyond the moment, supported by minds that could reflect on past encounters and adjust future choices. As water sources fluctuated, early ancestors began traveling longer distances than most primates. These journeys linked memories across landscapes, anchoring the earliest forms of route planning. Their expanding awareness of the environment helped shape the neural architecture needed for advanced spatial reasoning. Over time, this constant movement fostered endurance and patience, traits that later influenced hunting strategies and social cooperation. Through all of these changes, Africa's shifting climate did not simply challenge early humans, it sculpted them. The land asked for flexibility, memory, creativity, and resilience. It created conditions where intelligence was not merely useful but essential. Minds shaped by instability learned to anticipate change rather than collapse beneath it. They learned to see possibilities in uncertainty. In this restless continent, under skies that carried both promise and hardship, the foundations of human cognition deepened quietly. Each generation inherited a world that demanded more awareness than the one before. And in meeting these demands, the path toward a new kind of intelligence began to form, step by gentle step. As the African landscape continued its slow and restless shifting, the bodies of our early ancestors began to change in ways that seemed subtle at first. These changes unfolded across countless generations, almost unnoticed within the quiet flow of daily life. Yet within those small adjustments lay one of the most transformative steps in the long story of intelligence. It was the step that lifted the body from 4 limbs to 2, changing not only how our ancestors moved, but how they observed the world, used their hands, and shaped their future. The earliest moments of upright walking did not appear as sudden decisions. Instead, they emerged from the pressures of a land that demanded flexibility. Forests opened into grasslands, then closed again, then opened once more. Trees remained valuable for safety and food, but long stretches of ground had to be crossed to reach them. Standing taller granted a view over the grasses, allowing early hominins to see the movements of animals, the outlines of sheltering trees, and the glimmer of distant water. Balancing on two legs changed the horizon. It widened it. Walking on 2 feet also unlocked a new kind of efficiency. The structure of the pelvis shifted, the spine curved to support the upright stance. Muscles arranged themselves to hold the body in balance. With these changes came a surprising advantage. Moving long distances on 2 legs required less energy than traveling the same stretch on 4. This efficiency, spread across generations, allowed early humans to wander farther without exhausting themselves. They could follow migrating herds, search for scattered water sources, and explore new territories that lay beyond the boundaries of their ancestors. Yet perhaps the most profound shift came not from the legs, but from what the legs freed. With locomotion no longer dependent on all 4 limbs, the hands were released from the task of supporting the body. They were free to grasp with greater precision, to carry, to collect, and eventually to shape. The world, once navigated mostly through sight and movement, could now be explored through touch in new and subtle ways. Objects that were once merely obstacles or sources of food became items to be examined and transported. A simple stick could be held during a journey. A stone could be carried to a safer place before being cracked open. Food could be gathered and brought back to young or aging members of the group. These actions did not require advanced tools, not yet. They required only the idea that the hands could serve purposes beyond climbing or balance. Every such action carved new pathways in the brain, reinforcing the connection between thought and physical manipulation. As groups traveled greater distances, endurance became a defining strength. Humans were not the fastest creatures on the plains. They could not sprint like antelope or stalk silently like big cats. But they could walk. They could jog at a steady pace for long periods. Their bodies cooled through sweat rather than panting, allowing them to stay active even under the hot sun. This endurance opened the possibility of persistence hunting, a strategy that did not rely on speed but on patience. A group could track an animal over miles, following subtle signs in the earth, reading the landscape with growing intuition. They would move steadily while their prey tired. Success required observation, stamina, and an understanding of how animals behaved under stress. This new style of movement influenced the mind. Tracking demanded memory. It required comparing fresh footprints with older ones, sensing the direction of the wind, and noticing where a frightened animal might hide. The mind began to hold maps of terrain, learned not through immediate perception but through accumulated experience. Planning entered the rhythm of life. A hunt could last hours or even days. Groups needed to anticipate the route, consider the endurance of their members, and adjust to the changing patterns of the land. Walking upright also reshaped social interactions. A group moving together over long distances had to stay organized. Young ones needed support. Older individuals required pacing that matched their strength. Decisions about direction were shared or negotiated. Communication deepened through gestures and soft calls, helping the group remain connected as they traveled. Over time, these social demands strengthened cooperative behavior, which in turn encouraged the development of more complex cognition. The upright posture itself, changed how early humans saw one another. Eyes met more easily, expressions were clearer, subtle shifts in stance or posture carried meaning across the group. These new forms of nonverbal communication added texture to social life, encouraging understanding and empathy. In the broader sweep of evolution, walking upright may seem like a simple mechanical change, yet its consequences touched every part of the growing mind. It allowed hands to experiment with the physical world. It enabled long journeys that demanded planning and memory. It encouraged cooperation through shared endurance. It expanded the range of experiences that shaped the brain. As the sun rose and set across the shifting African plains, early humans walked mile after mile, carrying with them not only what they gathered but what they learned. With each step, their bodies and minds grew more attuned to a world that required foresight, flexibility, and resilience. Upright walking did not create intelligence on its own, but it opened a path where intelligence could begin to grow more deeply, guided by the ceaseless motion of wandering feet across an ever-changing land. As our story drifts onward through the long sweep of early human evolution, the landscape continues to shift beneath the feet of our ancestors. Forests grow and shrink, rivers carve new channels, plains open beneath wide skies. Through these slow transformations, the minds shaped by instability, endurance, and cooperation begin to reveal something new. A quiet threshold waits in the distance. It is the moment when thought first reached beyond the body and reshaped the world with intention. This moment arrives not with grandeur, but with the simple sound of stone striking stone. Long before true humans walked the earth, their ancestors began experimenting with rocks found along stream beds, river banks, and scattered hills. Some stones fit comfortably in the hand. Some had edges that sliced through plant fibers or cracked open hard shells. At first, these objects were likely just conveniences, carried from place to place without modification. But over generations, a subtle shift occurred. Instead of searching for the perfect stone, early hominins began to create it. The earliest known tradition of shaped tools is called the Oldowan. These tools appeared more than 2 million years ago. They were simple in form, little more than flakes struck from a larger rock. Yet the act of creating them required something extraordinary. It required sequencing. A toolmaker had to hold one stone, strike another at the correct angle, and anticipate how the force would break the material. The flake that fell away had a sharp edge. It could cut meat from bone, slice through plant stems, or help open nuts and tubers that fingers alone could not manage. Each flake carried within it the echo of intention. These early stone tools were not sculpted, but coaxed into shape through rhythm and force. The maker had to visualize the result before it existed. They had to strike once, then adjust, then strike again. This kind of mental planning had never been required in such depth. Moving through trees or across plains demanded awareness and flexibility, but shaping an object demanded foresight. With the rise of toolmaking, the physical world became an extension of the mind. A stone could hold an idea. As early hominins discovered how useful sharp flakes were, the practice spread. Young individuals learned by watching elders. Families carried favored stones across long distances. Certain places with good raw material became gathering spots, where minds practiced and refined the same movements again and again. Through repetition, the brain began strengthening pathways that supported planning, coordination, and the ability to imagine outcomes not yet seen. Over time, these skills deepened. Rough flakes evolved into more deliberate forms. Around 1.5 million years ago, a new tradition emerged, the Acheulean. These tools were far more refined than their Oldowan ancestors. Instead of simple flakes, early humans crafted teardrop-shaped hand axes, long blades, and symmetrical cutting tools. Creating them required not only strength, but patience. A toolmaker might strike a stone dozens of times to achieve a balanced shape. They removed flakes from both sides, thinning the tool gradually, carefully, until the edge curved just right. Such precision reveals a mind capable of holding multiple steps in sequence, a mind that can judge symmetry, adjust to mistakes, and continue shaping until the envisioned form appears. These abilities reflect more than mechanical skill. They reveal the growth of abstract thought. A hand axe was more than a cutting tool. It was a crafted object, shaped by memory and intention. It could be used to butcher large animals, carve wood, dig for roots, or prepare hides. Its versatility connected thought with action in new ways, encouraging early humans to approach challenges with creativity rather than instinct. As toolmaking became central to survival, new cognitive demands emerged. Toolmakers needed to understand which stones worked best and where to find them. They needed to remember how to hold the core, how to angle the strike, how much force to use. Teaching and learning became more important. The young watched the old shape objects with intention, and through this watching, the spark of cultural transmission began to take form. This was one of the earliest seeds of technology, yet it also shaped the brain itself. The regions responsible for coordination, planning, and abstract reasoning grew more intricate. Hands that once clung to branches now refined edges with subtle taps. Eyes that once scanned the forest canopy now studied the geometry of stone. The world encouraged these changes. Climate shifts brought new challenges, from seasonal dryness to unpredictable food sources. Tools offered solutions that bodies alone could not provide. They opened tougher plants, accessed richer sources of meat, and allowed early humans to survive in environments where competitors faltered. In this way, toolmaking accelerated cognitive expansion. Each improvement in the physical world fed back into the mind. Better tools demanded sharper thinking. Sharper thinking created better tools. This quiet cycle repeated for hundreds of thousands of years, carrying early humans slowly toward new forms of awareness. As the sun rose and fell across ancient plains, the sound of stone on stone echoed softly in many places. It was a patient rhythm, a rhythm that marked the dawn of a new relationship between thought and matter. With each flake that fell, the mind stepped a little further into possibility, shaping a world that could now be molded, altered, and imagined in ways no creature before had ever known. As the minds and hands of early humans slowly intertwined, shaping stones and navigating shifting landscapes, another force waited quietly in the background. It glowed at the edges of lightning-struck trees. It smoldered after volcanic heat. It flickered in dry grasslands when storms rolled across the sky. For millions of years, fire lived as a distant presence, both feared and respected by the creatures that watched it dance. But eventually, one lineage learned not only to approach it, but to carry it, feed it, and let its warmth reshape the path of evolution. At first, fire was an accident made useful. A smoldering branch might be salvaged from a burned patch of land, its heat coaxed back to life with dry grasses. Over many generations, early humans learned how to protect these glowing embers, how to transport them from one place to another, and how to nurture the flame when it began to fade. Later, they learned to spark their own fires with friction and stone. This control brought warmth, safety, and light, but it also brought something far more important to the story of intelligence. It brought cooking. Raw food requires time and effort to chew. Its nutrients are locked behind fibrous walls and tough proteins that the body struggles to break down. When early humans placed meat or roots into their newly tended flames, the heat transformed everything. Fibers softened, proteins unfolded, far more energy became available with far less effort. A meal that once required hours of chewing could now be eaten quickly, and the calories extracted from it increased dramatically. This change rippled through the body. With more accessible energy, the metabolic strain of maintaining a growing brain eased. The brain, so costly to fuel, could finally expand without overwhelming the body that carried it. Neurons multiplied, connections deepened, thought became richer and more flexible. The quiet glow of a fire granted early humans the caloric freedom needed to grow a mind that would one day stretch far beyond the limits of instinct. Cooking changed daily rhythms as well. More efficient nourishment meant less time spent foraging. Groups could settle in one place for longer periods. They could plan their days around shared fires, dividing tasks with greater cooperation. The warmth of the flames offered comfort during cold nights, allowing rest that was deeper and more restorative. This steady cycle of nourishment, rest, and social interaction supported the slow growth of complex cognition. Around the fire, communication also changed. In the safety of the light, predators kept their distance. The night, once ruled by fear, became a time of calm and connection. Early humans, no longer forced to retreat into darkness, spoke softly among themselves. They shared food. They comforted young ones. They passed down experience through gestures, expressions, and early forms of vocal communication. The fire created a shared space where thoughts could pass easily from one mind to another. The patterns of social bonding strengthened in this warm circle. Stories began as simple recollections of the day's events or warnings about dangerous places. Over time, these recollections evolved into deeper exchanges, weaving memory, emotion, and imagination. The fire offered a stage for the mind to expand inward as well as outward. It illuminated more than the faces gathered around it. It illuminated the growing complexity within those minds. Fire also extended the day. Before its glow, humans lived mostly within the limits of sunlight. After its arrival, waking hours stretched gently into the evening. This extension gave more time for learning, tool-making, and social bonding. The night, lit softly by crackling flames, became a period of reflection and collaboration. Children learned new skills under the watch of elders. Adults sharpened tools or prepared food for the next morning. The fire shaped time itself, slowing moments and making space for thought. With nighttime safety came another change. Predators learned to avoid the heat and light. The fear that once pressed early humans into constant vigilance loosened slightly. Minds could rest without slipping fully into sleep. A relaxed awareness settled over the group, a peaceful alertness that allowed conversations to bloom and memories to take deeper root. This safety nurtured creativity and experimentation. It gave humans the freedom to imagine possibilities beyond immediate survival. Fire played another subtle role. It altered the landscape. Burned patches encouraged new growth. Plants sprouted quickly after fire passed through them, attracting animals to feed on the young greens. Early humans learned to predict these cycles and eventually to guide them. In this quiet way, fire became a tool not only for cooking and protection, but for shaping the environment itself. The link between humans and fire deepened, influencing both ecological patterns and cognitive pathways. Each of these changes built upon the others. More nutritious food supported larger brains. Larger brains supported more complex cooperation. Cooperation supported better control of fire. The cycle spiraled gently upward, reinforcing itself over thousands of generations. No other species managed to harness this force so completely. Some feared fire, some approached it, but none mastered it, tended it, and relied on it in the way early humans did. In the glow of those ancient flames, the boundary between thought and world softened. With each spark that leapt into the night air, with each meal shared in the warmth, the path toward a new kind of intelligence grew clearer, shaped by the soft light that only one species learned to call its own. As firelight softened the night and early tools shaped the days, another quiet transformation unfolded within the human lineage. It did not appear in the hands that crafted stone or the legs that carried bodies across open plains. It appeared in something far more delicate. It appeared in the length of childhood. In the animal world, young lives often move quickly. A fawn stands within minutes of birth. A foal can run before the day ends. Many creatures must be ready to fend for themselves almost immediately, for danger waits close by, and the world allows little time for delay. Even among other primates, infants cling to their mothers from the first breath, gripping instinctively, already capable of navigating the movements of branches and bodies. Human infants arrived differently. They entered the world soft, fragile, and profoundly dependent. Their limbs lacked strength. Their eyesight was gentle and unfocused. They could not walk or cling or feed themselves. They needed constant care, constant warmth, and constant protection. At first glance, this seemed like a weakness. A long period of vulnerability demanded an enormous investment from parents, families, and larger social groups. Yet, within this vulnerability lay one of the most powerful forces shaping human intelligence. Human childhood stretched far beyond anything seen among other mammals. Instead of growing quickly into independence, human infants grew slowly, their brains developing at a steady pace that allowed new neural connections to bloom month after month, year after year. This extended period of growth gave the brain time to absorb the world in careful layers. It allowed curiosity to unfold before responsibility took hold. It created space for watching, listening, playing, and wondering long before the pressures of survival demanded adult skill. During these early years, children observed almost everything the adults around them did. They watched the movements of hands as stones were shaped, the patterns of footsteps during a hunt, the signals exchanged within the group, and the quiet rituals that carried meaning through daily life. They learned where food could be found in different seasons, how to read the sky for signs of approaching weather, how to navigate new territories, and how to use the tools that had taken generations to refine. None of this learning happened quickly. It did not need to. Childhood provided the time. This long period also encouraged cultural transmission, the passing of knowledge across generations. A child who spent years observing elders had the chance to inherit not just instinct, but the accumulated experience of the group. They learned traditions shaped by ancestors they would never meet. They absorbed lessons about danger, opportunity, and craft. Culture became a living thread, strengthened by the length of childhood and woven into the fabric of each new generation. Other species teach their young certain behaviors, but the lessons are often narrow and tied closely to instinct. Human learning expanded far beyond immediate survival. Children learned stories that carried wisdom. They practiced skills slowly until mastery emerged. They discovered how to work with others, how to interpret expressions and intentions, and how to solve problems through experimentation rather than inheritance alone. The very structure of family life shifted around this lengthened childhood. Adults cooperated more closely, sharing the burden of raising young ones who needed years of support. Grandparents, siblings, and unrelated individuals contributed to care. This sharing deepened social bonds and encouraged empathy, patience, and communication. The group grew stronger not through size alone, but through the weaving of relationships that had time to mature. The brain responded to this environment with remarkable plasticity. The slow pace of childhood gave it space to adapt to new challenges, refine problem solving, and strengthen pathways that supported planning, language, and memory. The world became richer because the mind had time to explore it carefully. Why did no other species invest so much time in childhood? The answer lies in the balance between cost and possibility. A long dependency is risky. It demands protection, stability, and reliable sources of food. Most environments do not allow such luxury. For many animals, rapid growth is the path to survival. Their bodies are shaped by the need to escape predators, compete for territory, or reproduce before conditions change. A long childhood would be a burden, not a benefit. But early humans, with their shifting environments, growing cooperation, and emerging technologies, found themselves in a unique position. Their expanding brains required time to develop. Their social structures provided support. Their tools and fire softened the world just enough to create safety for extended learning. Their minds gained depth precisely because their bodies remained dependent for so long. Childhood became a quiet workshop for the human mind. It allowed the slow gathering of wisdom, the gentle layering of memory, and the patient construction of understanding. It gave the mind room to breathe, to experiment, to imagine. And within that long unfolding, something new emerged. Intelligence became more than reaction and instinct. It became a shared inheritance, growing deeper with each generation that took the time to learn. In the long story of evolution, childhood is one of humanity's most remarkable gifts, a stretch of time where possibility gathers quietly, shaping the minds that would one day reshape the world. As childhood stretched, the mind and fire expanded the night. Another subtle transformation began to take root in early human life. It was not a change in bone or muscle. It was not a change in diet or habitat. It was something quieter, drifting first through simple gestures and later settling into the world as physical marks. It was the moment when memory stepped beyond the boundary of the brain and entered the landscape itself. For countless generations, knowledge lived only within minds. Lessons were carried through memory, strengthened by repetition, and passed from parent to child through action or voice. But as human communities grew and their lives became more complex, the mind alone could not hold everything. New experiences, longer childhoods, and more intricate social structures demanded more storage, more endurance, more ways to preserve understanding across time. Slowly, thought began to take shape outside the body. The earliest hints were likely simple: a line drawn in the dirt to show a path, a circle pressed into soft clay to mark a gathering spot, a pile of stones arranged near a water source to guide others. These signs held meaning for the people who made them, extending memory into places where the wind could sweep it, where rain could soften it, and where footsteps could carry it further. Over time, these gestures grew more deliberate. On cave walls, early humans traced shapes that echoed the animals around them. Fingers smeared pigment across stone. Hands pressed outlines onto cool surfaces. These images, created tens of thousands of years before written language, were more than decoration. They captured what words did not yet exist to describe. They preserved memory that could be shared with anyone who passed through the cave long after the artists were gone. In these dim chambers, lit by flickering firelight, memory became something communal and enduring. The act of painting or carving anchored thoughts in the world itself. A story of a hunt or a vision of an animal became a permanent trace, a message that traveled through generations. Children saw the marks and wondered about their meaning. Adults used them to teach. Elders saw in them a reflection of lives already lived. The objects created by early humans also became vessels of memory. A carefully shaped tool carried more than physical purpose. Its design encoded the knowledge of how to make it. Anyone who held it could study its edges, its curves, and the sequence of strikes that formed it. The tool was both an object and a lesson. It allowed knowledge to travel across time without relying solely on memory or spoken instruction. As tools became more refined, their construction grew increasingly intentional. Hand axes with symmetrical edges, spears with shaped tips, and later, more complex implements all required planning, decision making, and an understanding of how materials behaved. Each improvement was a step beyond instinct. It was one piece of knowledge layered on top of another, forming the earliest threads of what would one day become cumulative culture. Cumulative culture is the quiet force that allows each generation to begin not where their ancestors started, but where they left off. It is the ability to inherit not just the world, but the ideas that shaped it. This process gained strength as more knowledge moved into objects and symbols. The tools of one generation became the foundation for the next. The marks on cave walls became guides for future creativity. The arrangement of stones or bones became the blueprint for ritual, memory, and meaning. Even simple items like beads or carved figurines carried knowledge that reached beyond practicality. They revealed patterns of communication, identity, and belonging. They marked the presence of thought that extended into art, symbolism, and expression. Through these creations, early humans learned to shape meaning just as they shaped stone. As memory moved outward, society changed as well. Leaders could pass knowledge to many individuals at once. Groups could share understanding across distances and seasons. Tasks could be coordinated with markers left on the land. The environment became a canvas for intention, filled with reminders, warnings, and celebrations. Human beings began weaving a shared story into the very places they lived. This shift also softened the demands on individual memory. Not every lesson needed to be held in a single mind. Some could rest in the world, waiting to be rediscovered. This freedom allowed the brain to grow in new directions. It could use more space for imagination, problem solving, and abstraction. It could explore possibilities without losing the knowledge that anchored survival. In this gentle expansion of memory beyond the mind, humanity took another quiet step toward what would one day become writing, mapping, mathematics, and the vast landscape of shared thought that defines modern culture. But at this early stage, there was only the soft glow of firelight on stone walls, the rough texture of carved lines, and the echo of hands leaving traces for eyes yet to come. With each mark and each tool, memory learned to live outside the brain, carried forward not only through flesh and voice, but through the enduring things that hands created and minds imagined. As memory began to live outside the mind and tools carried the weight of shared understanding, another transformation slowly took shape within early human groups. It did not appear in stone or pigment. It emerged in breath, rhythm, and sound. It grew from murmurs exchanged in the dark, from soft calls passed between wanderers on open plains, from the need to guide, to warn, to teach, and to dream. This transformation was language, a quiet force that would become the most powerful multiplier of intelligence the earth had ever known. Long before language held structure, early humans already communicated with gestures, shared glances, and simple vocal calls. These signals carried emotion and intention, helping coordinate movement and maintain social bonds. But as human lives grew more complex, these early signals were no longer enough. Tools required explanation. Hunts required planning. Stories needed telling so that lessons could reach those who had never seen the events themselves. Slowly, sounds took shape in patterns, and patterns began to carry meaning. The shift did not happen all at once. It unfolded across countless generations, shaped by the needs of communities whose lives depended on cooperation. As groups began to create more intricate tools and travel longer distances, they needed ways to describe steps, places, and ideas. Simple calls expanded into combinations of sounds. These combinations gained structure, forming early grammar. Grammar allowed humans not only to say that something existed, but to describe where it was, how it looked, and what to do with it. With grammar came the ability to plan in layers. A hunter could tell another, not just "we go," but "we go after sunrise, follow the herd to the ridge, wait near the river, and strike when they cross." This layering of meaning reflected a layering of thought. The mind learned not just to imagine several steps in sequence, but to share that sequence with others. Thought became something communal. Language also changed teaching. Before language, skills were passed through imitation, a slow and often fragile method. After language, teaching became deliberate. An elder could describe how to strike stone to create a sharp edge, how to weave plant fibers into a tool, or how to track an animal by reading the faintest sign in the dust. Knowledge that once took years to learn through accidents or observation could now be shared in moments. The barrier between generations softened. Each new young mind inherited more than instinct, it inherited ideas. Storytelling emerged naturally from this new power. At night, when fires glowed softly against cave walls and the world outside settled into darkness, humans gathered to speak. They shared accounts of hunts, storms, migrations, and distant landscapes. Stories bound memory to imagination. They carried warnings about predators, maps of water sources, and lessons encoded in tales of cleverness, courage, or caution. These stories created a world that existed not only in the present, but in layers of time, connecting past and future in ways no species had achieved. Through storytelling, groups learned to understand dangers they had never seen and opportunities they had never experienced. Language carried emotion along with information. It allowed comfort, reassurance, and unity. In moments of hardship, words could hold a group together when instinct alone might have scattered them. Language also reshaped cooperation. Planning became more precise. Tasks could be divided with clarity. Individuals could share roles within hunts or migrations, coordinating in ways that relied less on mimicry and more on shared intention. A community could decide when to move, how to prepare for drought, or how to defend itself, all through the weaving of ideas in sound. With language, minds connected across space. But something even more remarkable happened. They connected across time. A person could pass down knowledge from their grandparents, who learned it from their own ancestors, forming a chain of understanding far longer than any single lifetime. Intelligence was no longer confined to a single mind or even a single generation. It became cumulative, gathering strength with each retelling. In this way, language became the key to sustained intelligence. Tools could shape the world, fire could nourish the body, childhood could stretch learning across years. But language tied all these threads together. It allowed thoughts to be stored in the minds of many, shared through sound, and carried forward like a river that never stopped flowing. With language, cooperation became more than instinctive behavior. It became strategy, culture, and vision. Groups could imagine futures not yet seen. They could prepare for events that had not yet arrived. They could picture places beyond the horizon and dream of solutions to problems that had not yet appeared. No other species reached this threshold. Others had communication. Others formed social groups. But none created a system capable of carrying layered meaning, teaching abstract concepts, or building cultures across time. None built a world of shared imagination that could grow without limit. Within the gentle loops of rising voices and quiet replies, the human mind found its greatest expansion. Each word spoken around ancient fires, each story told beneath shifting stars, each instruction whispered to a child learning a new skill, carried humanity closer to the intelligence that would one day reshape the planet. Language did not simply allow humans to communicate, it allowed thought to travel, to deepen, to multiply, and to bind people together in ways the world had never seen. It opened the path toward everything that followed, crafted in the soft breath of voices that reached beyond the body and into the shared realm of ideas. As language blossomed around ancient fires and thoughts began to stretch across generations, early Homo sapiens were not alone. Across the wide continents, other human species walked beneath the same skies, shaped by their own histories, molded by their own landscapes, and guided by minds that carried shadows of our own. They lived in forests, mountains, islands, and cold plains. They crafted tools, raised children, and learned from one another. For a time, the world held many forms of humanity, each following a path that moved alongside ours. These species were not distant cousins in the abstract sense. They were close enough that their footprints can still be recognized. Their hands shaped tools similar to our own. Their faces held expressions that we might understand even today. They lived parallel lives that nearly converged with ours, and in their stories we see how narrow the path toward modern intelligence truly was. In the cold regions of Europe and Western Asia lived the Neanderthals, a sturdy people shaped by ice age winds and long winters. Their bodies were powerful and compact, built to conserve heat and endure harsh climates. Within their skulls, their brains were as large as ours, and in some cases slightly larger. They crafted stone tools with remarkable precision. They hunted in coordinated groups, taking down large animals through skill and patience. Their shelters reveal traces of organization. Their graves suggest tenderness for the dead. Pieces of pigment found near their sites show that they, too, experimented with color and meaning. Yet Neanderthal life unfolded in smaller communities. Their population sizes remained low for long stretches, spread thin across a vast and challenging landscape. Knowledge moved through their groups, but it did not accumulate with the same momentum seen in Homo sapiens. The cycle of creating, improving, and transforming tools moved slowly. Their minds were capable, rich, and expressive, but the world around them limited how far their culture could grow. Farther east lived the Denisovans, a mysterious branch of humanity known mostly from fragments of bone and teeth. Their genetic traces linger in many people living today, especially in parts of Asia and Oceania. These traces suggest they were strong survivors, able to thrive in high mountains and cold environments that would challenge many others. Though few of their artifacts remain, the tools found near their sites show competence and coordination. They likely shared many abilities with both Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens, yet their communities remained scattered. Without large, connected populations, their cultural advances stayed local and fragile. vulnerable to climate changes and shifting territories. On distant islands lived other human species shaped by isolation. In the forests of Flores walked Homo floresiensis, a small bodied human relative whose stature stood no higher than the waist of a modern adult. Despite their size, they crafted stone tools suited to their environment and hunted the creatures that lived beside them. Their island home limited their resources, but it also protected them for a time. They adapted in ways unique to isolated ecosystems, holding on to ancient traits long after other species had changed. To the north in Luzon lived Homo luzonensis, another small bodied branch. Their bones show a mix of characteristics, some ancient and some strikingly modern. They carved tools suited for their island, moved through forests with skill, and survived in conditions that would have challenged others. Yet isolation placed a ceiling on their progress. With limited land, small populations, and fragile ecosystems, their cultural growth could not expand far beyond the island's edge. In Africa, another lineage, Homo heidelbergensis, stood tall and robust. They were skilled hunters who used wooden spears with accuracy. They lived in groups large enough to cooperate on complex tasks. Some researchers consider them to be among the most direct ancestors of modern humans and Neanderthals. They showed the early foundations of the social and cognitive abilities that later blossomed in Homo sapiens. But their world offered challenges that fractured their populations. Shifting climates split groups apart. Over generations, these divisions led some branches toward Neanderthals, some toward Denisovans, and one toward the lineage that eventually became us. All of these species came close to the edge of a significant threshold. They showed hints of abstract thinking. They crafted tools that carried intention and design. Some decorated objects, some buried their dead. Some navigated landscapes with remarkable skill. Their minds were not empty spaces. They were filled with memory, awareness, and the quiet intelligence of people who understood their world deeply. Yet none of them crossed the line into sustained cultural acceleration. None created networks large enough to preserve and build upon knowledge at the rate achieved by Homo sapiens. Population size played a role. Geographic fragmentation played another. Some species lived in small, isolated groups, limiting the spread of ideas. Others faced harsh climates that demanded all their time and energy simply to survive. Even slight disadvantages became critical in the long flow of evolutionary time. When environments shifted or competition increased, their fragile cultural foundations wavered. Skills lost in one generation were not always regained in the next. The chain of cumulative knowledge, so vital to long-term progress, broke more easily for them than for the lineage that carried language, storytelling, and deep cooperation further with each passing century. In the end, these other humans did not vanish because they were primitive. They vanished because their paths were steep, their populations small, and the world around them unforgiving. Their stories are still carried within our genes and within the tools they left behind, silent reminders that many kinds of humanity once walked the earth, each shaped by its own rhythm, each almost crossing the same remarkable boundary. Their presence enriches our understanding of how narrow and delicate the route to sustained intelligence truly was, and how many companions once journeyed beside us before their footsteps faded into the long quiet of time. As the many branches of the human family slowly disappeared and our own lineage continued onward, the path ahead did not unfold in a straight or gentle line. It twisted through hardship, scarcity, and moments when the entire future of our species balanced on the thinnest edge. For a creature whose intelligence was beginning to blossom, These moments of danger became strange and powerful sculptors. They pressed humanity into narrow passages where only a few survived, and within those few, the seeds of future possibility quietly rearranged themselves. Across the long arc of prehistory, several population bottlenecks shaped the human story. A bottleneck occurs when a species shrinks to only a small number of survivors. The reasons vary. Sometimes drought, sometimes volcanic eruption, sometimes climate swings so severe that landscapes transform faster than life can adapt. When populations fall so sharply, the genetic diversity of the species contracts. Only a fraction of the original possibilities remain, carried forward by the individuals who endure. For early humans, these bottlenecks were not gentle. They pressed entire continents into silence. They reduced once spreading groups into scattered pockets, separated by great distances or harsh environments. In some eras, humanity's global population may have dropped to only a few thousand. In one especially severe period, researchers believe it may have fallen to just a few hundred. Imagine long dry winds sweeping across a continent where forests have thinned and rivers have curled inward like receding breath. Imagine small groups wandering in search of water, guided only by memory and instinct, watching familiar lands fade into barren stretches. Food grows scarce. Storms become unpredictable. In such moments, survival becomes an act of constant attention. Minds sharpen, not through comfort, but through necessity. Stress, when endured generation after generation, can accelerate adaptation. It does so not through sudden leaps of evolution, but through the quiet filtering of traits that help individuals withstand pressure. In times of abundance, many traits can persist without penalty, but during a bottleneck, the environment selects harshly. Only those able to navigate change, plan ahead, cooperate deeply, and use their growing abilities in flexible ways pass their strengths into the future. Some scientists believe that these ancient bottlenecks may have shaped not only the genetic structure of our species, but the cognitive architecture that supported problem solving and resilience. When resources are scarce, groups must innovate. They must explore new territories, diversify their diets, and discover ways to extract nourishment from landscapes that once offered little. These conditions reward creativity and foresight as much as they reward endurance. During periods of intense climate instability, early humans learned to read the land with greater subtlety. They tracked seasonal patterns more carefully. They noticed signs of distant storms, the shifting behavior of animals, and the appearance of new plants. Stress forced them to pay attention, and paying attention shaped their minds. In small, struggling groups, social structures also changed. Close cooperation became essential. Young ones required care from multiple adults. Elders, carrying memory and experience, became invaluable. The exchange of knowledge tightened. Teaching grew more deliberate. Bonds strengthened through shared hardship. In these moments of scarcity, the foundations of human social intelligence deepened. Communication became a lifeline. Stories became guides. Shared memory became a form of survival. With fewer individuals alive, genetic drift also played a role. Traits that might have been rare in larger populations could become common within a small group simply by chance. A slight shift in brain wiring, a tendency toward curiosity, a capacity for planning, or a spark of social intuition could spread quickly if the group that carried it endured. Each bottleneck reshaped the human genome in ways that no stable period ever could. One of the most profound bottlenecks may have been linked to a massive volcanic eruption thousands of years ago, when ash and climate cooling rippled across the continents. In its wake, human numbers dropped sharply. Yet the survivors emerged with lineages that would eventually spread across Africa and into every corner of the world. Their traits, refined by hardship, formed the roots of future diversity. These near extinctions did not simply prune the human family tree. They acted as sculptors, pressing minds to their limits and revealing hidden strengths. They rewarded adaptability, cooperation, and memory. They narrowed humanity into a slender passage through which only certain traits could pass, and in that narrowing, the foundations of modern cognition were strengthened. As the world eventually warmed and landscapes grew lush again, these small groups expanded outward. They carried with them the remnants of ancient hardship, woven quietly into their bodies and minds. The challenges they endured did not erase their vulnerability, but they sharpened the abilities that would one day allow humanity to flourish. In the soft, patient stretch of time that followed, the world filled once more with human footsteps. But deep in their lineage lived the memory of those quiet struggles, the moments when the entire species hovered near the edge of disappearance. From those narrow passages, new possibilities emerged, carried forward in minds shaped not only by discovery and play, but by the long and fragile work of survival itself. As the long journey of humanity threaded its way through hardship, firelight, tools, and language, something new and quietly astonishing began to take shape within human communities. It was not a physical trait. It was not a shift in bone, muscle, or posture. It lived instead in the space between minds, in the shared rhythms of teaching and remembering, in the ways one generation placed its knowledge into the hands of the next. This force, soft but unstoppable, became the unseen engine that carried human intelligence further than any other species had ever traveled. It is often called the cultural ratchet. A ratchet is a small device that allows motion in one direction while preventing it from slipping backward. Culture, in the human lineage, began to act in the same way. When one individual discovered a new method, a new tool, or a new understanding of the world, the idea did not vanish with their passing. It remained, held by others, passed along, refined, and preserved. Once a new step had been taken, humanity rarely returned to an older, simpler state. Knowledge accumulated, and with each addition, new possibilities opened. This slow building began with simple improvements: a sharper stone edge, a more reliable fire, a better hunting strategy, a new way to weave fibers. These changes were small on their own, but they layered across time. A child learned the technique, invented by an ancestor they would never meet. That child, as an adult, might adjust the technique slightly, making it even more effective. Their children, in turn, would inherit not just the original insight, but the improvement as well. The cycle continued quietly across centuries. This layering of knowledge is something no other species has managed at a meaningful scale. Many animals learn from one another. Young dolphins imitate the hunting tricks of their mothers. Crows watch others use sticks to pull insects from bark. Chimpanzees pass down certain tool behaviors across generations. But these traditions remain mostly fixed. A behavior appears, spreads within a group, and stabilizes. It does not gather new layers with each generation. It does not grow in complexity. The behavior plateaus. In humanity, the opposite happened. Ideas rarely stayed still. Part of this growth came from the expanding abilities of the human mind. Language let ideas travel farther. Longer childhoods allowed deeper learning. Cooperative groups created safe spaces where skills could be practiced and taught. But the cultural ratchet turned not because of any single feature, but because of how all these features work together. Knowledge became a shared treasure. It belonged to the group, not just to the individual. The more individuals contributed to it, the richer it became. As early humans spread across Africa, then beyond it, they carried their cultural libraries with them. Over time, these libraries expanded into thousands of small innovations. When taken together, they transformed how humans lived. Spears gained stone tips, which later gained refinement in shape and balance. Shelters made of branches grew into structures of wood and stone. Clothing sewn from hides evolved into garments suited for cold climates, far from the warmth of the African plains. Each improvement depended on the improvements before it. Once a technique for cutting and shaping existed, it could be used for new purposes. Once a group learned how to preserve food, they could travel farther. Once they understood how to bind materials together, they could create tools of multiple parts. Knowledge did not replace old ideas. It connected to them. The cultural ratchet worked even during quiet periods, when the environment was stable and daily challenges manageable. It worked during times of hardship as well, when groups needed to invent new strategies to survive. A drought might inspire new foraging methods. A colder climate might require better clothing. A new animal behavior might lead to a new hunting technique. Challenges did not erase knowledge, they added to it. As human populations grew, the network of exchanging ideas expanded too. Some groups specialized in certain crafts, developing advanced techniques shaped by local materials. Others discovered new ways of organizing themselves, strengthening social ties and improving cooperation. When groups met, they traded not only goods, but ideas. Through these exchanges, innovations traveled across continents, carried by stories, tools, and wanderers who shared what they had learned. Over thousands of years, the cultural ratchet revealed its power most clearly in the pace of technological growth. What once took many generations to refine eventually took only a few. A new method of shaping stone spread quickly. A successful technique for preserving food appeared in many places. Later, much later, ideas like agriculture, writing, and metallurgy emerged from this same quiet engine of accumulation. Each invention made the next one possible. Other species plateau because their behaviors remain bound to instinct or narrow patterns of imitation. Humanity broke free from those limits. Our minds learned not only to copy, but to question, refine, and expand. The cultural ratchet allowed each generation to stand on the shoulders of countless others, reaching further with every step. In this gentle rising arc of shared memory, the story of humanity's intelligence continued to unfold. No single individual shaped it, no single moment defined it. It grew in the spaces between minds, in the tools held by countless hands, in the stories whispered beside long fading fires, and in the slow but endless climb of knowledge that never slipped backward. Here, within the quiet turning of this cultural ratchet, the human mind found the path that would lead it into the vast and unfolding future. As the human mind continued its slow ascent, shaped by memory, language, culture, and the delicate sharing of knowledge across generations, the rest of the living world followed its own paths. Many species showed glimmers of remarkable intelligence. Dolphins solved intricate problems with their fluid grace. Elephants mourned their dead and remembered landscapes with quiet precision. Crows crafted hooks from twigs, bending the world around them to meet their needs. Octopuses navigated mazes and played with objects as if testing the edges of possibility. Yet none of these species traveled as far as humans did. Their minds reached astonishing heights, but eventually the upward climb slowed, then settled into plateaus. These were not failures. They were limits, shaped by the bodies, environments, and lifeways that each species inherited. For intelligence to grow without end, a lineage must pass through many narrow gateways. Most species reached some of these gateways, but very few reached all of them. One of the first constraints lies in the hands, or rather, in what serves as hands. Manipulatory ability shapes how thought interacts with the world. Human hands, with their flexible thumbs and fine motor control, allowed early ancestors to shape tools, carry objects, and explore textures in delicate ways. In other species, the story is different. Dolphins, for all their brilliance, live in a world where objects drift and dissolve. Their flippers are powerful, but lack the ability to grasp. Elephants have sensitive trunks, capable of subtle movements, but their sheer size limits the kinds of tools they can easily wield. Birds can grasp with beaks and feet, yet their wings limit the complexity of their manipulations. Octopuses, though extraordinary with their arms, live lives that are short and solitary, leaving little room for cultural inheritance. In each case, the body sets quiet boundaries. A mind may imagine, but without a way to alter the world with precision, many ideas remain suspended in thought. Lifespan also shapes intelligence. For culture to grow, individuals must live long enough to learn, refine, and teach what they know. Humans carry an unusually long childhood and an unusually long adulthood. Elders live years beyond their reproductive prime, guiding young ones with knowledge gathered over decades. This extended lifespan creates a bridge between generations. In contrast, many highly intelligent species have shorter lives. Octopuses rarely live more than a few years, some barely reaching adulthood before reproduction ends their journey. Even with remarkable cognitive potential, such short lives cut cultural learning before it can deepen. Without time, knowledge remains shallow, resetting with each new generation. Reproductive rates carry similar weight. Species that produce many young quickly may not invest heavily in extended teaching or slow development. Their survival relies on numbers, not depth of learning. Species that produce few offspring often invest more time in their young, but if their populations remain small or scattered, knowledge spreads slowly. Dolphins and elephants share strong family bonds, yet their communities are limited by long gestation periods and low birth rates. Their cultural traditions form small islands of knowledge, precious but fragile, easily disrupted by environmental change or loss of elders. Ecology places further constraints. A species can only develop in the context of its environment. Dolphins live in vast oceans where objects are scarce, fire is impossible, and tools cannot accumulate. Elephants roam wide landscapes but need enormous amounts of food, forcing them to travel constantly rather than stay in one place to craft or refine. Crows live in skies and forests where their small bodies allow clever navigation, yet their environments rarely require the kind of multi-step engineering that humans developed on the ground. Even slight differences in ecology create vast differences in opportunity. For intelligence to grow in complexity, a species must live in a world that rewards experimentation, repeated practice, and cumulative skill. Many animals face environments that are either too stable, offering little reward for innovation, or too harsh, leaving no time for play or exploration. Sensory perception shapes these limits as well. Humans rely heavily on vision and touch, which pair naturally with toolmaking and environmental manipulation. Dolphins perceive the world through echolocation, a remarkable sense that reveals structure and sound, but not the fine details needed for crafted objects. Elephants sense vibrations through the ground, giving them insight into distant storms and migrations, yet this sense does not translate easily into the manipulation of tools. Each species perceives a world shaped by its senses, and within that world, some forms of intelligence thrive while others remain out of reach. Environmental challenges define additional boundaries. A species that faces constant threat may not have space for curiosity. A species that depends on specialized food may be locked into narrow behaviors. A species confined to an island may never encounter the pressures that foster innovation. Intelligence grows where conditions simultaneously demand adaptability and allow time for exploration. Such balance is rare. Across the living earth, intelligence appears again and again, each time differently shaped, each time adapted to the needs of the species that carries it. But only the human lineage crossed the long chain of constraints that allowed intelligence to build upon itself endlessly. Other species reached great heights, but the narrow pathways that lead toward cumulative complexity, technological refinement, and cultural expansion remained closed to them. These limits do not diminish their brilliance. They reveal how delicate and improbable the human journey has been, and how many worlds of thought exist beneath the surface of the one we know. Each mind follows the shape of its body, its senses, its life, and its land. And in these shapes lie both the beauty of diversity and the quiet constraints that guided evolution's many experiments in intelligence. As the story of intelligence unfolds across the long sweep of Earth's history, the human mind is not the only spark that glimmers in the dark. Across oceans, forests, plains, and coral reefs, other species rise toward remarkable forms of awareness. They solve problems, build relationships, and explore their worlds with quiet brilliance. Each lineage approaches the threshold of deeper intelligence in its own way, reaching upward until a ceiling, shaped by body, ecology, and circumstance, gently brings the ascent to rest. These ceilings do not diminish their wonder. Instead, they reveal how rare and fragile the path beyond them truly is. Dolphins, minds in motion beneath the waves. In the open ocean, dolphins move through a world of shifting currents and endless horizons. Their brains are large, intricately folded, and alive with social complexity. They recognize themselves in reflections, teach hunting strategies to their calves, and coordinate in groups with remarkable fluidity. Through echolocation, they create acoustic images of the world, sensing details invisible to the human eye. If any creature seemed poised to follow a path similar to ours, it might have been the dolphins. Yet their world brought them toward a different fate. The ocean, vast and ever-changing, limits the accumulation of material culture. Objects drift away, fire cannot burn, tools cannot be crafted or stored. Even when dolphins use sponges to protect their snouts while foraging, these tools are simple, passing from one generation to the next in only a few regions. Without the ability to shape and preserve objects, their thoughts never anchor themselves in the physical world. Knowledge moves through stories of sound and action, but it cannot accumulate in durable form. Their anatomy also shapes their ceiling. Without hands or grasping limbs, they cannot manipulate materials with precision. Their brilliance remains untethered, fluid and ephemeral, carried only in the minds of individuals and the collective memory of their pods. Crows, intelligence in feathered form. High in the branches and along the windswept edges of cliffs, crows practice a quieter form of intelligence. They bend twigs into hooks, hide food in dozens of locations, and remember the faces of people who have threatened them. Some species, such as the New Caledonian crow, show a creativity that echoes the earliest toolmakers. Their potential is striking. With nimble beaks and sharp eyes, they navigate puzzles that confound many mammals. In another world, with different pressures and longer lives, crows might have taken an extraordinary path. Yet their bodies impose limits. A beak, no matter how skillfully used, cannot offer the full range of manipulation needed to refine objects in multiple steps. Their wings, essential for flight, restrict the weight they can carry and the time they can spend working with materials. Their brains, though efficient, are small relative to body size, and the metabolic demands of flight leave little margin for the energy heavy expansion seen in primates. Their societies, though complex, remain relatively small, often shaped by seasonal patterns and territorial boundaries. Knowledge passes between individuals, but cumulative culture does not grow in wide layers. The spark is there, but the world they inhabit keeps it small and bright rather than wide and steadily rising. Elephants. Memory bound to earth. On warm plains and in forested valleys, elephants walk paths known to their ancestors for generations. Their memories stretch across seasons, helping them find water in years of drought and navigate landscapes altered by storms. They comfort distressed members of their herds and pause at the bones of their dead with a tenderness that suggests deep awareness. Their large brains could have supported even more complex cognition, yet their lives unfold across limitations shaped by their immense size. Elephants require huge quantities of food each day. Their days are filled with constant movement, searching for plants and water to sustain their heavy bodies. This leaves little time for play or experimentation, activities that often fuel cognitive growth. Their manipulative ability, focused through the trunk, is sensitive and powerful, but it does not support the fine control needed for complex toolmaking. Their long gestation periods and low birth rates also limit how quickly innovations can spread. A breakthrough in behavior may take many years to ripple through a population, and sudden losses from environmental disruption can erase entire threads of emerging culture. Their intelligence is vast, but it is anchored to the rhythm of the land and the weight of their bodies, held steady beneath the ceiling of their ecological demands. Octopuses, a short life filled with wonder. In coral reefs and rocky crevices, octopuses move with liquid grace. Their arms explore the world with hundreds of sensitive suckers. Their skin shifts in color and texture like a living painting. They solve puzzles, escape enclosures, and manipulate objects with ease. Their intelligence is unlike any other on Earth, distributed across their limbs in ways that challenge traditional notions of mind. Yet their brilliance burns quickly. Most octopuses live only a few brief years. Some survive only months before reaching the end of their life cycle. Even with remarkable neural architecture, such short lifespans prevent the slow accumulation of knowledge that larger societies rely on. They live largely solitary lives, meeting only to mate. Without long childhoods or enduring families, their discoveries vanish with them. Their world, rich but dangerous, offers little stability. The reef shifts, predators loom, and survival requires constant vigilance. There is no long chain of memory, no cultural thread to deepen across generations. Their intelligence is a spark that flares brightly and then fades. The ceilings of evolution. Each lineage approached the edge of deeper intelligence with extraordinary potential. Each reached upward until biology, ecology, or time itself imposed a limit. None failed. They simply followed paths shaped by the worlds that made them. Their ceilings remind us how many conditions must align for intelligence to rise without plateau, and they illuminate how rare and fragile the human path truly was, threading through narrow gateways that most species never encountered or could never cross. Their stories enrich our own, revealing the many ways a mind can grow and the many ways it can reach its quiet, natural height. As the long arc of Earth's story continues, patterns emerge like soft threads woven through deep time. We have watched lineages rise, explore new possibilities, and drift toward their natural limits. We have seen how intelligence can glow briefly or take root in surprising places, shaped by landscapes, bodies, and ancient rhythms. Yet none of those paths, bright as they were, ever combined in quite the way that shaped our distant ancestors. What set our lineage apart was not a single breakthrough, but a slow gathering of unlikely ingredients. Each one alone was remarkable but not extraordinary. Together they formed a recipe so rare that it may not appear again on this world. The first was bipedalism, a gentle shift in posture that changed everything. When early hominins straightened their spines and placed their weight on two legs, their relationship with the land transformed. The savannas and woodlands of ancient Africa stretched outward in vast horizons, and walking upright offered a vantage point few other mammals shared. It also brought new efficiency. Two-legged movement required less energy over long distances. In a world where water sources shifted and food was unpredictable, this mattered deeply. But bipedalism did something even more profound. It freed the hands. Limbs, once used for balance and movement, were now open for exploration. Fingers curled around branches, stones, bones, and roots. Touch became a language that shaped thought. The world could be tested, lifted, struck, scraped, and carried. As hands grew more capable, the brain found new reasons to grow as well. From those hands came the second ingredient: tool use. Early stone flakes glinted beneath the SN, shaped through simple gestures that carried deep implications. These first tools changed how our ancestors met the world. They opened carcasses with ease, cut roots with precision, and expanded diets in ways no soft jaw or simple claw could match. Over time, tool-making demanded more from the mind. Sequencing actions, recalling shapes, and imagining finished forms required memory, planning, and patience. Each generation refined what the previous one had begun. Slowly, thought entered the physical world, and once it did, the mind had a reason to stretch in new directions. The third ingredient was fire. Its glow reached farther than any tool, reshaping life from the inside out. As flames softened food and unlocked rich calories, bodies changed. Digesting cooked meals required less energy than processing raw plants or tough meat. The savings flowed into the brain, feeding its hunger for oxygen and nutrients. With more energy available, neural networks deepened. Ideas sparked more easily. Waking hours extended into the night, wrapped in warmth and gentle light. Fire also changed social rhythms. Groups gathered in circles that softened the darkness, sharing warmth and safety. Stories flowed through these moments, early traces of a culture that would one day cross mountains and rivers. Around those flames, a sense of belonging grew stronger, and with it came new layers of cooperation. That cooperation forms the fourth ingredient: social complexity. Humans were never solitary. Our ancestors leaned on one another for survival, raising children collectively, hunting in groups, sharing food, and protecting territory. Social bonds demanded memory, empathy, and subtle communication. They also encouraged planning and negotiation. A mind that could understand another mind held enormous advantages. Yet sociality was only one piece of the puzzle. Many species live in groups, from wolves to dolphins to crows. What made our lineage different was how social life intertwined with the other ingredients. Each one amplified the others until they formed a delicate but powerful chain. The fifth ingredient was a long childhood. Human infants arrived in the world almost unfinished. Their brains were still developing. Their early years required constant care and teaching. This extended learning period gave room for complex skills to be shaped slowly and passed down through families and communities. A young human could absorb knowledge from many adults, storing memories that earlier species had no time to gather. Such a long childhood demanded a cooperative society. It also demanded stable resources, and so knowledge accumulated rather than fading at each generation's end. The sixth ingredient was climate instability. Africa's landscapes shifted relentlessly as ice ages pulsed across the globe. Rainfall patterns changed. Forests grew and vanished. Grasslands opened and disappeared again. Food sources rose and fell with little warning. The world refused to stay the same. In such a place, only flexible minds could flourish. Each environmental shift nudged our ancestors toward creativity, the ability to predict, adapt, and imagine new strategies became essential to survival. Tools diversified. Social networks grew more complex. Movement across vast distances became common, and those who could teach and learn quickly left lasting marks on the lineage. These six ingredients did not appear all at once. They emerged over millions of years, overlapping in ways that strengthened each other. Together, they created a narrow path, winding and precarious, that no other species has walked. Other creatures had one or two of these traits. Some had three. None experienced the entire combination in the same sequence, at the same scale, or under the same pressures. This is why the rise of human intelligence is so unlikely to repeat. The world would need the same blend of posture, hands, diet, fire, social care, childhood, and shifting climate, all aligning in just the right order. The same pressures would need to return. The same opportunities would need to remain open. It is a recipe that Earth may never cook again. In the quiet of this moment, the story moves gently forward, following the delicate thread that these ingredients began to weave, a thread that soon shaped the very structure of the human mind. As the path of human evolution continued, the ingredients that shaped our lineage began to settle into the body itself. The hands that shaped tools, the fire that softened food, the long childhood spent absorbing the stories and skills of a community, and the restless landscapes that demanded constant adaptation all pointed toward one place. Deep inside the skull, a new kind of architecture was forming, delicate and complex, carved slowly by countless generations. This structure did not appear in a single moment. It grew the way forests grow, through layers that shift and intertwine, through branches that reach out in new directions, through spaces that open gently for possibility. What emerged was a brain unlike any other on Earth, shaped not only by size, but by the arrangement of its connections, the rhythm of its development, and the surprising flexibility that allowed it to imagine futures long before they arrived. At the heart of this transformation was the neocortex. In other mammals, it existed as a workable sheet, a helpful layer for vision, movement, and sound. In humans, it expanded until it folded over itself again and again, creating valleys and ridges that added enormous surface area without enlarging the skull beyond what the body could support. These folds held billions of neurons arranged with subtlety, each part communicating with many others. The neocortex became a canvas for abstraction, pattern, and reflection. If one could drift quietly through these layers, the landscape would feel like a vast night sky filled with signals instead of stars. Paths would weave in every direction. Some would handle vision, capturing shapes and colors from the world. Others would manage touch, walking, listening, or balance, but the most striking feature would be how densely everything connected. Signals could travel through many routes, choosing paths shaped by experience, memory, and need. This density created something rare in biology. It made the brain deeply plastic. Plasticity is the ability to change, to reshape itself, to strengthen some pathways and quiet others. Many animals show hints of this. They learn routes through forests or feel the tension of a familiar river current. But human plasticity reached farther. It allowed skills to be layered over one another. It allowed language to bloom in young minds. It allowed a person to hold a tool in childhood and still refine its use in adulthood through reflection, repetition, and imagination. Plasticity also meant that the brain could adapt when the world changed. New foods, new tools, new climates, and new social pressures could reshape how networks worked together. Instead of being locked into rigid patterns, the human mind stayed fluid for decades. This flexibility formed the grounding for culture, for innovation, and for the quiet expansion of knowledge across generations. As the neocortex grew more intricate, another region began to deepen its role. The prefrontal cortex, tucked just behind the forehead, expanded beyond what is seen in any other species. This part of the brain is slow to mature. In children, it develops gradually, shaped by interactions, environment, and ongoing experience. Yet once it matures, it holds some of the most delicate functions of human thought. The prefrontal cortex allowed the mind to weave time together. It could hold memories of the past, imagine possibilities in the future, and connect those with the present through long strands of reasoning. With this came foresight. A human ancestor could imagine a hunt before it happened, plan a route, anticipate danger, or think several steps ahead while shaping a stone tool. This ability was not simply problem solving. It was the creation of mental structures that stretched across hours, days, or even seasons. Symbolic reasoning grew from these abilities. Rather than respond only to what was visible, humans could assign meaning to marks, sounds, or gestures. A word could stand for a tool, a place, a story, or an idea. A carved line on a piece of bone could echo an event or a pattern remembered from the sky. These symbols became bridges between minds, allowing knowledge to move from one person to another without being tied to direct experience. In time, these patterns intertwined. The expanded neocortex offered space for complexity. The dense web of connections allowed many kinds of information to be combined. Plasticity allowed learning throughout life. The prefrontal cortex guided long chains of thought. Together, these features made it possible to reflect on actions before taking them, to understand the intentions of others, to cooperate in large groups, and to build traditions that reached far beyond any single lifetime. This wiring did not emerge because evolution sought intelligence. It emerged because countless conditions nudged it gently forward. Rich diets, social living, shifting landscapes, tool use, fire, and prolonged childhoods gave human ancestors the pressures and opportunities that encouraged deeper thought. Other species had glimpses of these pathways, but none carried all of them at once, and none held them long enough for such architecture to solidify. As the human brain grew into this unusual structure, the world began to change in response. Landscapes filled with new possibilities, rivers crossed through migration, tools shaped the hunt, stories carried memory. And slowly, the mind became a place where ideas could gather, settle, and bloom. As the human brain grew into its unusual shape, the body that carried it began to feel the strain. Evolution had unlocked a new kind of intelligence, but every gain arrived with a burden. These burdens shaped our lineage as deeply as any adaptation. They carved challenges into childhood, into movement, into the rhythms of daily survival. No other species carried a cost quite like this, and yet our ancestors moved forward, step by quiet step, finding ways to live with the weight of their growing minds. One of the earliest and most profound costs emerged in childbirth. As the pelvis adapted for walking upright, it narrowed into a shape that supported long journeys across open landscapes. This narrowing created tension with another slow change, the steady expansion of the infant skull. With each passing generation, the brain grew larger, adding folds and connections that would one day support language, memory, and reflection. But this growth made birth far more difficult. Other mammals gave birth with relative ease. A newborn gazelle could stand moments after entering the world. A foal could run within an hour. Their bodies arrived nearly complete, guided by instincts shaped over millions of years. Human infants were different. Their brains were too large to be born fully developed, so nature chose another solution. They arrived early, soft and helpless, their heads fitting just barely through the narrow passage. Mothers bore the cost through pain, risk, and vulnerability. Entire communities bore it too, gathering around births to offer support and increase the chances of survival. This challenge shaped human social life. It encouraged cooperation, tenderness, and shared responsibility. It deepened the bonds that held groups together. Birth became not just the beginning of a life, but a moment that required many hands and many hearts. From this need for support grew a kind of togetherness that carried into every part of human existence. Alongside the difficulty of birth came another cost, the immense energy demands of the human brain. Even at rest, a human brain consumes a large share of the body's fuel. Each thought, each memory, each plan glowing quietly in neural networks draws energy pulled from food gathered or hunted hours earlier. For early humans, this meant constant pressure to find rich nutrition. The landscapes they moved through demanded creativity and success in foraging, tracking, and cooperative hunting. Without reliable calories, the brain's growth would slow and its potential would falter. Many species avoided this cost by keeping their brains small and efficient. Their strategies worked well in stable environments, but humans moved forward with a brain that needed more. In return, it offered new ways to meet its demands. It supported the invention of tools that cracked bones and accessed marrow, the cooperation that brought down large animals, and the cooking that transformed tough plants and meat into accessible energy. Yet the pressure never lifted entirely. A hungry human mind struggled. Entire migrations and cultural changes were shaped by the need to feed this organ of thought. Another cost came from social dependence. Because human infants arrived so early, unable to walk or feed themselves, they required years of protection and teaching. A mother alone could not meet all the needs of such a slow developing child. Fathers, siblings, grandparents, and unrelated members of the group all carried pieces of the responsibility. This created a fabric of cooperation that few other animals experienced. Dependency also influenced how human emotions developed. It encouraged patience, empathy, and a deep sense of connection. It shaped the rhythms of speech and gesture, the soothing patterns of lullabies, and the steady sharing of food and tasks. Yet dependence made humans vulnerable. A broken group, a lost caregiver, or a sudden environmental shift could erase generations of progress. Many lineages may have faltered in this way, their fragile communities unable to hold together through crisis. The final and perhaps most profound cost lay in long development. While other animals grew quickly, Humans grew slowly. Childhood stretched across years, adolescence across even more. This gave the brain time to learn, explore, and refine its pathways, but it also meant decades before an individual could contribute fully to survival. Each child represented a long investment that required stability, safety, and shared effort. In harsh climates or times of scarcity, this long path could become dangerous. Groups that persevered did so by nurturing cooperation, storytelling, teaching, and innovation. They learned to pass knowledge from one generation to the next, ensuring that each child inherited not only genes, but wisdom. This interwoven cultural safety net allowed humans to survive challenges that would have overwhelmed a solitary species. Through all of these costs, humanity moved forward. Childbirth remained difficult, yet communities learned to support mothers. Energy needs remained high, yet cooking and cooperation kept the brain nourished. Dependency remained deep, yet it strengthened the bonds that held groups together. Long development remained risky, yet it gave the mind the time it needed to grow into something extraordinary. The path was not easy. It never was. But through these costs, the human lineage gained the chance to think in symbols, imagine distant futures, and shape the world with intention rather than instinct. The burdens carried through each generation became the quiet foundation of a mind unlike any other on earth. And now, with this foundation laid, the story drifts onward toward the next delicate steps in the rise of human intelligence. As the story of our lineage unfolds, the mind that humans carry begins to seem less like a guaranteed outcome and more like a delicate convergence of forces that might never align again. Each earlier chapter has shown how intelligence rose, faltered, paused, or blossomed depending on landscapes, bodies, and chance. Now the question turns softly toward the future. Could another species follow a similar path? Could a new kind of deep intelligence take shape somewhere on Earth if given enough time? To explore this, we step gently across the planet's present rhythms, letting the quiet patterns of biology and ecology reveal what is still possible and what has slowly slipped beyond reach. The first barrier is physical. Superintelligence requires an immense brain, and a brain of that scale demands both space and stability. It must fit within a skull that can support it without crushing delicate tissue. It must be supplied by a body capable of feeding it with a steady stream of energy. It must develop through a childhood long enough for learning to take root and spread. Few animals now living meet even the earliest conditions. Elephants have large brains, but their bodies are already stretched to the limit of what landscapes can sustain. Dolphins and whales live in worlds where tools cannot be crafted or stored. Large birds face the weight limits of flight. Octopuses possess brilliant neural networks, but their bodies follow life cycles that end after only a few short years. The second barrier is ecological. Superintelligence does not grow in isolation. It needs room to explore and experiment. It needs reliable food sources, long-lived individuals, and stable communities. Yet modern environments tremble with pressures that leave little space for such development. Oceans warm and acidify, forests shrink. Species compete in crowded ecosystems where survival favors speed, instinct, and efficiency more than the slow rising arc of cognition. Many of the niches that once allowed human ancestors to experiment with new strategies no longer exist. Open savannas, shaped by shifting climates, rich in diverse prey, yet pressured by unpredictability, offered challenges that encouraged creativity. Today, much of the world's land is fragmented, and the animals that roam it face rapid changes that do not reward slow, thoughtful adaptation. When survival depends on immediate response, the long journey toward deeper intelligence becomes harder to sustain. The third barrier is time. The path that led to humans unfolded over millions of years, each generation adding a small thread to a growing tapestry. For another species to follow a similar trail, vast stretches of uninterrupted time would be required. But Earth is changing faster now than at almost any point in its history. Species are disappearing at accelerated rates. Landscapes shift in decades rather than millennia. Climate patterns that once played out over slow cycles now swing with startling speed. A lineage that might have begun to explore tool use or more complex communication can lose its window before those early steps take root. A promising species may face extinction before its mind has the chance to grow beyond instinct and simple learning. Even if a new spark of potential appeared, it would need the space and stability to mature. Beyond these barriers lies a quieter pattern. The human species now touches every corner of the planet. Forests are shaped by our presence. Rivers flow through channels carved or guided by human hands. Even the deep seas feel the distant reach of our activities. In such a world, another species rising toward high intelligence would encounter an environment already altered by the one lineage that walked that path first. This does not close the possibility entirely. Somewhere in the ocean depths, a dolphin may refine a new hunting strategy that spreads through its pod. In a distant forest, a clever bird might discover a new way of shaping branches. On a coral reef, an octopus might use a shell in a way no octopus has done before. Intelligence continues to flicker and grow in many small forms across the planet. Yet the transition from bright spark to sustained, self-amplifying intelligence is fragile. It needs conditions that nurture exploration for many generations. It needs time that stretches beyond the usual lifespan of ecosystems. It needs freedom from intense competition and abrupt change. These gentle spaces are rare now, scattered thinly across the world, and often overshadowed by the presence of the species that already crossed the threshold. For another superintelligence to rise, Earth would need to settle into a slow rhythm again. Climates would need to stabilize. Ecosystems would need to expand and diversify. Entire lineages would need to be granted the long, patient silence required for ideas to strengthen across centuries. Such conditions may return in distant ages, long after the present chapter has faded, but in the near span of time, the window grows narrow. The path that once opened for our ancestors now feels like a narrow bridge that formed once and then gently closed behind them. And so the story drifts forward, shaped by what is possible and by what has quietly passed out of reach, as Earth continues its long and ever-changing journey through time. As our story widens beyond the Earth that shaped us, a softer question begins to drift into view. If the path to human intelligence required such delicate alignments, what might this mean for life beyond our world? Beneath distant stars, on planets where oceans shimmer under unfamiliar skies, could minds like ours ever take shape, or is the human journey an echo so rare that it may exist only once in the long quiet of the cosmos? To explore this gently, we look not outward in certainty, but inward toward the patterns that guided life on Earth. These patterns whisper clues about what might and might not be possible elsewhere. The first clue rests in the idea some scientists call the rare Earth hypothesis, the notion that complex life requires a long chain of circumstances that seldom occur together. Earth sits at just the right distance from its star, warm enough for liquid water, yet cool enough to preserve delicate molecules. Its surface holds continents broken by plate tectonics, creating varied environments that reshaped evolution again and again. A large moon steadies the tilt of the planet, preventing wild swings of climate. Oceans cycle nutrients, shielding early life from harsh conditions. Even the presence of Jupiter and Saturn plays a role, quietly diverting comets and asteroids that might have struck more frequently. These features formed a cradle that allowed life not only to survive, but to grow in complexity through billions of years. On many planets, the cradle may never form. On others, it may break too soon. Still, even with such perfect conditions, the journey to human intelligence was far from guaranteed. For most of Earth's history, life remained simple. Microbes ruled the world for billions of years, shaping the air and oceans with quiet diligence. When complexity did arise, it emerged slowly and in fragile bursts, often halted by extinction or limited by environment. The rise of large animals required oxygen levels to reach a precise threshold. The diversification of vertebrates depended on ancient climates shifting at the right times. Each step in this long chain was a narrow opening that could easily have closed. Beyond biology lies another limit, one woven into the very nature of cognition. Intelligence is costly. It demands constant energy and long periods of development. It requires bodies able to support large brains, environments able to feed them, and social structures that allow learning to spread. On Earth, very few species approached these thresholds. Many reached plateaus where the cost of further mental expansion outweighed its benefits. If these limits exist here, they may exist elsewhere too. Minds capable of building tools, storing knowledge, or imagining futures may require conditions that form only rarely across the galaxy. And even when they do form, they may not last. Extinctions sweep across planets the way storms move across seas. A young intelligent species might disappear before it leaves a trace in the cosmos. This offers a quiet perspective on why the universe seems so silent. Space stretches across unimaginable distances, filled with stars older and younger than our own. Yet no signals reach us from civilizations as complex as ours. Perhaps life is common, filling oceans on distant worlds with drifting shapes and soft stirrings. But the rise of deep intelligence may be faint and fragile, like a single candle lit in an endless night. Still, the absence of evidence does not erase possibility. Somewhere, on a world where oceans lap against unfamiliar shores, evolution may be following its own winding path. Perhaps a creature with bright eyes and nimble hands is shaping the first tools. Perhaps a species with intricate songs is weaving the early threads of culture. Perhaps a lineage with clever limbs glows with a spark that has not yet reached its full warmth. But if such beings exist, they too must navigate the same constraints that shaped us. They must overcome the energy demands of large brains, the risks of long childhoods, the challenges of changing climates, and the ever-present threat of extinction. They must develop cooperation strong enough to support vulnerability, communication rich enough to guide learning, and stability lasting long enough for culture to build upon itself. Many planets may never offer such a path, others may offer it only briefly. The window that allowed our species to grow may be a rare opening in the long story of the universe, a narrow corridor that closed quietly behind us once we passed through. As we drift back toward Earth in this reflection, the stars feel both familiar and distant. They shimmer with possibility, yet they remind us how unusual our own story is. Intelligence, in its deepest form, may be one of the rarest outcomes of evolution, shaped by chance, by environment, and by the quiet patience of time. And so, the universe remains vast and mysterious, holding countless worlds where life may breathe softly in the dark, even if only a few ever lift their thoughts high enough to wonder about the stars themselves. As the story turns from deep time toward the present, the human mind stands as both a monument to ancient forces and a living, shifting landscape. For millions of years, evolution molded our cognition through hunger, danger, climate, and cooperation. Now the world around us has changed. The forests that once shaped our eyesight have thinned. The savannas that trained our endurance have given way to cities. Firelight has faded beneath electric glow. Tools that once weighed heavy in the hand now exist as patterns of code and quiet pulses of information. Yet the question drifts softly through this new world. Are we still evolving mentally? Does the human mind continue to shift beneath the surface of our daily lives, shaped by subtle pressures that echo far beyond our awareness? To understand this, it helps to imagine the mind not as something finished but as something breathing. Even now, in every generation, new patterns form. Some rise from culture, some rise from behavior, some rise from biology itself, moving at a slower rhythm, yet still present. One of the clearest signs of ongoing change lies in cognition shaped by culture. Human culture evolves far faster than genes ever could. Each generation grows within new environments of symbols, tools, and shared ideas. Thousands of years ago, early writing transformed how memory was stored. Centuries ago, the spread of books expanded how knowledge was preserved and shared. Now the digital world offers a new landscape with different demands. Minds adapt to this shifting terrain. Attention patterns change. Working memory adjusts. Problem solving spreads across networks rather than resting solely within individuals. None of this replaces genetic evolution. Instead, it creates cultural currents that shape how genes express themselves. A child raised in a world of language-rich environments develops cognitive pathways different from a child raised in sparse isolation. Opportunities for learning influence how the brain forms connections, strengthening some routes and letting others fade. While this is not evolution in the genetic sense, it interacts with biology in ways that ripple across generations. But beneath culture's swift flow, biological evolution continues its slow, steady movement. Over the past few thousand years, human brains have not grown larger. In fact, many studies show that average brain volume has decreased slightly since the late Stone Age. This might seem surprising after such a long story of brain expansion, yet the change does not signal a decline in intelligence. Instead, it reflects new balances between energy, efficiency, and the tools that now extend cognition. Brain size is not the sole measure of mental ability. What matters is how networks connect, how efficiently they communicate, and how flexible they remain. A smaller brain can be more efficient if it holds dense, well-integrated pathways. Some scientists suspect that as societies became more cooperative and specialized, the demands on individual problem solving shifted. Social groups could share burdens, distribute tasks, and pool knowledge. In such systems, cognitive efficiency mattered more than raw size. Modern selective forces also shape the path forward. In ancient times, intelligence often determined survival through direct challenges. Navigating landscapes, predicting prey movement, crafting tools, and forming alliances all carried immediate consequences. Today, survival pressures differ. Medical care protects many who once would have faced early death. Food is often available without the need for long hunts. Climate, once unpredictable, is now mediated by shelter and technology. This shift does not stop evolution, it simply changes its shape. Instead of selecting for endurance or problem solving under constant threat, Modern conditions may favor traits related to social navigation, emotional regulation, or adaptability within complex cultural environments. The ability to interpret subtle signals, manage large networks of relationships, or learn quickly in an information dense world may influence reproductive success in ways that differ from ancient times. Another influence comes from the global mixing of populations. For most of human history, groups remained relatively isolated. Genetic changes stayed local, building unique adaptations in different regions. Now humans travel, connect, and form families across continents. Gene pools blend, smoothing regional differences and creating new combinations that never existed before. Such mixing creates more variability, and variability is the foundation on which evolution works. There are also small but measurable changes in cognition shaped by rapid societal shifts. Some populations show slight increases in working memory or pattern recognition over recent centuries. Others show adjustments in temperament or social behavior as environments favor collaboration over aggression. These changes are subtle, often silent, but they reflect the ongoing conversation between the human mind and the world it inhabits. Yet perhaps the most profound form of mental evolution today does not occur in the genome, but in the vast shared space of human culture. Ideas accumulate like geological layers, shaping how each new generation thinks. A child born now inherits not only the quiet architecture of the brain, but also the collective knowledge of many centuries. Each tool, symbol, story, and discovery becomes part of an evolving cognitive ecosystem. In this sense, evolution has shifted from shaping the brain directly to shaping the environment that shapes the brain. It is a softer, wider process, unfolding through schools, languages, shared technologies, and global communication. It is no less powerful. It may, in fact, be faster. As the story settles quietly into the present moment, the human mind feels both ancient and new. It carries the imprint of long vanished landscapes and the echo of ancestral challenges. Yet it also grows within a world that changes with each passing year. The mind is still evolving, both through biology and through culture, tracing paths that stretch into a future not yet imagined. And like every chapter before this one, it unfolds slowly, patiently, across the fragile span of generations. As our story approaches its quietest reflections, the path that shaped the human mind begins to feel less like a straight line and more like a delicate thread stretched across deep time. It winds through forests long turned to stone, across plains where ancient winds once gathered dust into swirling curtains, and through the shadows of caves where early hands left faint marks on cool stone. This thread survived droughts, storms, predators, and moments so narrow that even a slight shift could have erased its future entirely. For most of Earth's history, life followed its own steady rhythms, rising and fading in cycles shaped by sunlight and sea. But the journey that led to humans depended on a series of fragile moments that held the world in a balance often too thin to see. Each moment was a turning point, a quiet decision made not by intention but by survival, chance, and the slow pulse of evolution. The earliest steps of our lineage occurred in landscapes that tested every creature that lived within them. The climates of ancient Africa shifted again and again, pushing forests outward and then retreating them back into scattered pockets. Groups of early hominins wandered between these shifting borders, adjusting to grasslands one century and to thick canopy the next. Each transition demanded creativity. Those who survived did so by exploring new foods, new tools, and new ways of moving across the land. Yet even these early survivors walked a narrow edge. A single dry season that lasted too long, a disease that swept through a small community, or a predator that arrived at the wrong moment could have ended the lineage before it gathered momentum. Many related species vanished along the way, leaving only their bones as reminders of paths not taken. Ours endured because of a chain of small successes, each one fragile, each one temporary, each one necessary. Later, as firelight began to flicker across the night, another layer of chance settled into the story. The ability to control flame could have been lost as quickly as it was found. A storm could drown the embers of a wandering group. A migration into wet valleys could make fire impossible to maintain. Yet knowledge passed from one hearth to another, slipping through generations like a whispered memory. Fire remained long enough to change the shape of our bodies, the rhythms of our evenings, and the structure of our societies. The development of tools followed a similar balance. The earliest flakes of stone could have been forgotten with the death of a single skilled hand. A group that relied too heavily on a particular technique might have vanished in a single disaster. But each time the world pressed against our ancestors, they found new ways to adapt. Tools grew in complexity not because success was guaranteed, but because failure was always near. Even language, one of the most profound elements of our identity, sits upon a fragile foundation. It grew in scattered bursts, shaped by the needs of small communities. A slightly different environment, a slightly different pattern of social living, or a slightly shorter childhood could have prevented language from taking root. Without language, culture would have remained thin and easily lost. Without culture, memory would not have stretched across many generations. Without that stretch, the human mind could not have expanded into the flexible, symbolic engine we know today. Then came bottlenecks, moments when the entire species dwindled to only a few thousand individuals, perhaps fewer. Volcanic winters darkened skies, glaciers advanced across continents, droughts squeezed life from once fertile ground. In these moments, the thread that carried our lineage thinned almost to invisibility. Genetic diversity shrank, communities scattered. The slightest misfortune could have ended the story here. But small groups endured, holding on in pockets of shelter where food still flowed and rivers still ran. When the climate eased, these groups began to grow again. Ideas returned to the land. Tools spread across valleys. Fire lit new regions of earth. The thread thickened slowly, though it remained delicate in ways no one could have predicted. Even in recent history, the continuation of this thread depended on small accidents of circumstance. A failed harvest might have changed a migration route. A misplaced step might have taken a hunter's life. A change in ocean currents might have altered the course of entire civilizations. History is full of turning points that balanced on moments as thin as a blade of grass. The survival of our species was never inevitable. It was a story shaped by chance and resilience, by vulnerability and cooperation, by conditions that aligned only briefly before drifting apart. Had any of these conditions shifted just slightly, the world might have filled with minds very different from our own, or perhaps with none capable of shaping symbols, telling stories, or imagining distant futures. And yet, through all of this uncertainty, the thread held. It wound itself through deserts, mountains, and frozen plains. It stretched across countless challenges. It carried the weight of memory, discovery, and quiet persistence. Each generation tied a new knot into its length, a knot made from survival, curiosity, and the simple act of continuing onward. Now that thread lies in our hands, carrying the echoes of every ancestor who kept the story alive. It is long, fragile, and still unfinished, drifting gently toward the next chapter that awaits beyond this moment. As our long journey drifts toward its final moments, the story of human intelligence settles into a gentle stillness. We have followed its beginnings in ancient forests, watched it flicker through the minds of distant ancestors, and traced its narrow passage through droughts, migrations, storms, and shifting continents. We have seen how many paths almost led to minds like ours, and how many fell away before reaching the threshold. Now, at the quiet edge of this exploration, a soft truth rises like mist over calm water. The emergence of a mind capable of shaping symbols, imagining futures, and reflecting on its own place in the world was not guaranteed. It was improbable, delicate, and shaped by a chain of events that could have faltered at countless points. A slight shift in climate, a lost tool, a failed migration, an epidemic in a small clan, a volcanic eruption arriving one generation earlier, the absence of fire, the loss of a single elder whose memory held the knowledge of a valley or a season. Each of these moments carried the weight of possibility. Each could have shifted the story away from the path that eventually led to us. And so the human mind, for all its strength and reach, rests upon a foundation of fragility, not weakness. Fragility, the kind that allows something rare to survive only because conditions aligned just long enough for it to grow. This rarity gives the story a particular texture. It reminds us that intelligence is not the natural endpoint of evolution, but one of its quiet experiments. It is a response to certain pressures, unfolding only when body, environment, and chance create the right mixture. Many species found paths that did not require deep reflection or layered communication. They thrived without building tools or passing stories through generations. They mastered their worlds with instincts shaped by millions of years of adaptation. Yet our lineage, through a long sequence of challenges, began to lean into thought. It made use of hands, firelight, social bonds, curiosity, and the steady stimulation of unstable climates. Each step nudged the mind toward greater flexibility, greater abstraction, greater awareness. What emerged was not simply intelligence, but a slow unfolding of possibility. This unfolding carries meaning not because it was destined, but because it almost was not. And now, standing in the quiet glow of this realization, the mind that wonders about its origins becomes part of the story it reflects upon. We are shaped by rarity. We are shaped by improbability. And that gives a gentle weight to our existence. It reminds us that thinking itself is a gift built on the survival of countless ancestors who stayed alive long enough to teach their children. It reminds us that cooperation carried us through moments when we were few in number and vulnerable to the cold or the hunger of long seasons. It reminds us that creativity did not appear suddenly but grew slowly through hands shaping stone and stories shaping memory. With this comes a soft sense of responsibility, not one spoken loudly or imposed through command. Rather, a quiet understanding that the ability to think, plan, dream, and reflect is not common in the universe. It is something to be tended with care, something to be used gently, something that can guide not only our actions, but the world that surrounds us. When we look at mountains, rivers, forests, and oceans, we do so with a mind that can imagine ages long past and ages still to come. When we listen to the wind through trees or the hum of distant cities, we listen with a consciousness shaped by events older than memory. This awareness allows us to care for things that do not speak, to protect species that do not reason, and to value stories that have not yet been told. And as this long exploration settles into evening, A quiet appreciation fills the space between thoughts. Human intelligence, with all its flaws and wonders, is a tender phenomenon. It came from the earth, yet it rises above instinct. It belongs to nature, yet it turns toward meaning and reflection. It is both ancient and new, both powerful and fragile. So we close this journey gently, letting the weight of deep time soften into the present moment. The stars above hold their quiet places. The earth carries its slow rhythms. The mind that contemplates them rests, knowing that it is part of a rare and delicate thread woven through the vastness of the cosmos. And as we drift toward rest, the story settles with us, warm and calm, shaped by awe, by gratitude, and by the peaceful understanding that our existence is both improbable and deeply, quietly meaningful.